Please do not forget to visit Unfound's website, theunfoundpodcast.com. Marlo Christopher Gulley, Chris to those who loved him most, was a 26-year-old from Chicago, Illinois. He was a prankster with a baby boy on the way. On the night of October 9th, 2017, Chris was with a friend, and this friend claims Chris walked off with a woman and did not return. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dunsel, and this is Unfound. The Bermuda Triangle is an area that captured worldwide attention during the latter part of the 20th century. Ships and planes disappearing, possibly getting sucked up by UFOs or sucked down by huge whirlpools. Yet now, here in 2024, we now know that, number one, this got started due to someone's imagination. And number two, statistically, that area of the ocean is no more dangerous or mysterious than any other part of the globe. For Unfound, we've encountered a bit of the same thing. The Colonial Parkway murders. Except for the first two killings of Rebecca Dowski and Kathy Thomas, there's no proof the others had anything to do with that stretch of road at all, despite Keith Call's car being found there. To me, it's just been marketing, lazy reporting, and sensationalism. Well, with the disappearance of Chris Gulley, everything happened within a few blocks of each other. And that's not propaganda, hyperbole, or exaggeration talking. Those are the facts. What happened inside the Campbell Square. And now a summary of the case. Chris Gulley was the youngest of six. He had 4 brothers and a sister. He was known to be the prankster of the family, and Chris showed this quality right up to the time of his disappearance. Chris was tall, but thought basketball just wasn't for him. He became a father for the first time in his late teens, and Chris was on the verge of becoming a father again in late 2017. The main problem Chris had in his life was that he seemed to go onto the wrong track when his family moved from one part of Chicago to another. This led to Chris spending a couple of stints in jail, but nothing connected to violence. So, on the night of October 9th, 2017, Chris was back in his old neighborhood with a friend of his, Alan, also known as Mookie. They had just stopped at Chris's girlfriend's aunt and uncle's to get a phone charger. After this, Chris, while walking with his friend, FaceTimed with the mother of his other child. She later said the call ended abruptly when Chris seemed to be surprised by something he saw and said he would call her right back. Chris did not do this. He was never seen again. The friend Mookie later said the two encountered a woman, Brandy Jones, and she and Chris walked off together. Weeks after the disappearance, Brandy would state she was not there and had no idea what happened to Chris. In fact, there is no proof the two even knew each other. This is all curious because a friend of Chris's, Joanna Wright, disappeared on the same block just 9 months before he did. Rarely on Unfound have we been asked to seriously consider that a disappearance is connected to a wide criminal conspiracy involving multiple murders and disappearances. Yet, that's what we may have with Chris's case. Contemplate why we don't run into more disappearances that are part of widespread violent activity, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, If Chris was worried about the previous violent incidents in which he likely knew the victims, why did he not say anything about his fears? Number 2, knowing about those previous violent incidents, why did he not tread more safely in that neighborhood where they happened? And number 3, why is there no proof that Chris planned to meet Brandy Jones or any other woman on the night of his disappearance? Chris's family absolutely believes foul play occurred on the night of his disappearance. The guest for this episode is Chris's mother, Melody. Unfound news. Just 2 days ago, August 21st, I appeared on the podcast, The Consult. It's the best interview that has ever been done with me regarding Unfound and disappearances. Please find The Consult in your podcast application. Next, if that's not enough attention, this Sunday, August 25th, the first episode of The Girl on the Milk Carton will premiere on the Oxygen Network. Not sure how much of myself made it into the final cut. Maybe none of me. And I'd be okay with that. Finally, I will be in the Orlando area for a disc golf tournament during the Labor Day weekend. If you are in the area, and if you walk into the correct bar, you might just see me doing karaoke. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Chris Gulley, Melody. Melody, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think maybe I have to ask, your name is Melody. Do you come from like a musical family, or do you know how you got your name, or what? I'm find this kind of topic fascinating.
Well, I have a uncle that's a musician, that he's a blues musician.
Neat.
So not necessarily because of a musical family background. Um, a neighbor of my mother's actually named me. I actually came home from the hospital unnamed.
Huh.
And yeah,
Wow, that's
and I
interesting.
didn't receive. I I was just called. I don't know what I was called before I was 6 months old. I got the name Melody from a neighbor of my mom, and after 6 months, I was named.
You were Melody. Okay. All right.
Melody.
Great story. Great story. Thank you for sharing on that. Just wanted to make sure on that. I think you may be first Melody. Of course, we have 340 guests on this podcast. Now, I could be wrong, but you may be the first. So I always need to ask. And we have had some people with unusual first names or unique first names, and I always make sure to ask them about that. So there we go, Melody. Thank you for joining myself and the listeners today. Of course, we're here to talk about Chris and his disappearance, and of course, some of these other things that went on that block there in Chicago about 6 years ago. But first, let's talk about your family. Of course, Chris is your son. Any other kids? Any other family members? Maybe just describe your family.
Well, Chris is the youngest of um six. So he has, yeah, he's the youngest of six.
Okay.
Five boys and one girl. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Boy, that
he's
girl
a
never had to worry about anything, did she, with
not
five
a
brothers,
thing.
right?
Right,
Watching out for
right.
her.
Looking out for her really good, and now she thinks she's their mother. she thinks she thinks she's their mother, and
Okay.
so even with the older siblings, older brothers she has, she thinks she's the boss.
Okay. Okay. All right. And the ages, of course, Chris is the youngest. What is the age range from the oldest to the youngest?
Well,
Approximately.
the eldest are there's two of them.
Okay.
They're 40, well, will be 41 shortly.
Hmm.
My daughter is 39.
Okay.
I have a 36-year-old, a 35-year-old, and of course Chris is 33.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So about 7 to 8 years there of
yeah,
range. Okay, great.
yeah, yeah.
All right. How does everybody get along? I mean, maybe going back to when they were maybe all under the same roof or whatever else. Get along. How would you
Wonderfully,
describe raising them? Just try to get an idea for your family before we get to Chris, specifically.
wonderfully. They great relationship. One hand held the other, all for one, one for all, type relationship. I would look at all of them would be bunched in bed together, and or everybody, would try to bombard me and in my bed with me, but very, very close knit and loving. They were just, it was them. It was
Okay.
them. It was just them. And that's how they are now.
Mm.
They make sure they try and look out for one another the best they can, and everybody's adults now.
Yeah.
But you know, you,
Yeah. And I'm
it's
guessing
just
you
something
have
about
some
cooking.
grandchildren with 6 kids. I'm guessing you have some
Oh my
grandchildren now,
goodness,
quite a few.
I have quite a few. I lose count. I lose count, but I think I believe seven. Seven.
Wow. Good for you. Congratulations.
Could be
Really.
eight.
Okay. All right.
Could be
Hey,
eight.
I
So,
can
yeah,
understand why you might lose count. But
yeah,
okay. Very good with all those kids, of course. Well, thank you
yeah,
for sharing that. Okay. Let's now move. Of course, the reason we're here, of course, is because of Chris. And I'll just
yeah.
start here. Maybe Chris, comparing Chris to the other children, unique compared to them, maybe like a personality or interests, or would you say, kind of all the same? Where does Chris maybe fall in that? The most outgoing, maybe the shyest. How do you think about him compared to your other kids?
Um, Pretty. They're basically on the same kind of range. Shy, a little.
Okay.
Soft spoken. Yeah, pretty much soft spoken around me. I'll say that
All right.
around me. Chill and just laid back and just the
Okay.
average young man.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
yeah, pretty
All right, very good. Let's now talk about Chris. What were going back, maybe not near where he went to the time he went missing, but thinking maybe back to his teenage years. Was he into music? Was he into sports? What were his kind of interests and hobbies going back, to before he became an adult at 18? What would you say about that? Just some things that come to mind.
considering. Yeah, considering his height, 6'3".
Wow.
You know where I'm going with this, and
Yeah.
where I wanted him to take that height. He Football, yeah, he liked football. He
Hmm.
liked sport that in that aspect, but one of the things because of his height, he kind of shied away from basketball because it was more expected because he was tall and people expected him to do that, but
Yeah.
he just wasn't interested. Um, my children basically were more interested in baseball and football and track and
Yeah.
debate, different things of that nature,
Yeah.
band, music, because my daughter, she she was in a band, and that was one of the things that we were used to attending, all the track meets, the band meets, the wrestling matches, football games.
Yeah.
And that's by him being the youngest, he kind of looked towards those different interests. But
Hmm.
basketball, everybody expect me to be a basketball, want me to play basketball. He did not want it. He
I
did not. He
see.
shied away from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. What about any other interests outside of sports? Was he maybe into like writing or hobbies, things like that? Anything that comes to mind? Just to get to
Well,
know him a little better.
I would come across notebooks where a little rap music,
Okay.
from all my boys, but I would come across notebooks where I see in his handwriting where he's trying to write rap songs or different
Yes.
things of that nature. And at the
Sure.
time, YouTube was coming into existence, and everybody wanted to get on YouTube and do some things. Chris
Mhm.
is a character, a clown, just
Okay.
a comedian basically,
Oh, okay.
and a lot of his writings were kind of lingering on the comedic,
Okay.
area. So
Okay.
yeah, he was a comedian. He liked to tell jokes. He liked practical jokes,
Hmm.
and he loved to eat. He loved food. So
Okay. Yeah. Me too. Yes. Who doesn't? Okay. Very good. What about school? How about school?
oh,
What did he take an interest in school? Graduate high school? Did he, do any additional education after that? What can you say about his education?
he did not finish high school.
Okay.
Um, After high school, right before he went into high school, we ended up moving. And I think the shock difference in where we were from, one side of town and then moving to another side of the city, it was it was hard
Yeah.
because if you wasn't from the neighborhood, you had to kind of, you know, had issues.
Yeah.
You're a stranger basically. And that lent a lot to a lot of different occurrences that Chris went through.
Yeah.
I remember you telling us, they don't accept me because I'm not from here. Growing up and being from the south side, the west side of Chicago and transitioning to the south side of Chicago, first of all, my children came to the south side with a different, they were polite.
Mm.
They spoke in sentences, complete sentences, and they ate vegetables. They loved broccoli, one of those things.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. And it was weird to a lot of people that they came in encounter with. And they would tell me, these people they don't accept us. We're not from here. We're not from here. And fighting. And it was one of those things with him because he was at school by himself at this time, into high school
Okay.
by himself, and he was like, they're not accepting me. So it kind of went in the wrong direction
Raindrops, and
with
that's why,
him.
and that's you saying that's the reason he dropped out of school is because he was going there, did not feel like he was meant to be there. People not, not people not liking him, not giving him the respect he deserved.
Right. And, the authorities, the officials, the school administration, I mean, it's one of those, basically, they were asking me, what can I do? What could they do in regards to, they had no control. And either my son went to school and got beat up or got into fights, because I don't want to say beat up, but got into
Yeah.
fights, and
Okay.
those were the things that were happening. My daughter would have to go and get him from school because there's a crowd waiting for him because he lived on the wrong side of town, and that was one of the things that challenged him, and from then on.
Okay. So moving from the west side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago, was that due to you're changing your work or something like that, or you needed a change, or what
I
brought that
wanted
all on?
change. I wanted change. I wanted some. I grew up on the west side of Chicago my
Okay.
entire life.
Okay.
I never went anywhere. I always wanted to move around and see other things.
Yeah.
You know, my job was still there, but I just wanted to do other things, see others. My family was there. Everybody was there, and it was. I felt like I was under a thumb, under a
Yeah.
big thumb. I knew everybody, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
branch out and see something different, experience something new. And I think
Yeah.
that was a mistake on my part.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that was a mistake on my part.
Okay. All right. How old was Chris when you made that move? Approximately.
13, I believe. 12 or
Okay. Yeah.
13.
So getting to those formative years into, early teens, like seventh, eighth grade, somewhere in
Yeah.
there, and then he gets into, this new crowd, and like you said, not,
Oh,
not accepted. Of course, at that point, maybe a lot of those kids have been going to school all together for a long time, and
right.
it's as a new kid, it's hard to break in.
Yeah, and a boy especially. So I didn't think those things then, and I think it now, and I understand it now. But and then the hard part is realizing that my kids actually came to me and say, "Hey, we don't belong out here." The older children were gone off to school, but the ones that were left at home, like, they don't accept us. So I didn't realize until recent years could have been the biggest mistake I made.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't know if he could have predicted that or not. Of course, these things happen. I remember back to my
Right.
high school days, kids moving from other places. Of course, I didn't grow up in Chicago. I was out in the hills, like, the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. But, kids coming in and some, adapt well and some don't. It depends on, there's so many different factors.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate. It was in the same school district the whole time. So,
Yeah.
it just, but I'm sorry to hear that he had that experience. What did he do then after he dropped out? Did he get a job? What did he do with his time?
Well, we thought he was going to go into the Job Corps. That was my goal of getting him involved in the Job Corps.
Mhm.
And we did the research and everything. And one of the things that I was told, if he doesn't do it on his own, you can't do
Yeah.
it. And so it had to be left up to him to make the calls and say, hey, this is what I want to do. I couldn't do it myself. I couldn't say, hey, I want my son in the Job Corps and blah, blah. So, I tried everything I could, but aside from beating a 6'2" guy,
Yeah,
6'3"
yeah,
guy, you
yeah.
know, I, I couldn't do it. But and that was at 16. He would have been able to go at 16, 16 years old. He's standing 6'3". I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah. So what did
so
he didn't? I guess he didn't end up doing that. What did he end up doing? Kind of just hanging out for a while.
mhm,
I just have to
pretty
ask.
much,
Pretty
pretty
much.
much
Okay.
hanging out,
Okay.
developing friendship, and just hanging out,
Okay.
doing nothing. And no matter how much, I'm trying to encourage him, hey, you got to do something. You're not just going to sit around here and do this, do that, or whatever. And before he got a chance to do anything, he ended up in trouble with the law.
Were any of your other kids living, maybe let's just maybe get to like 16, 17 years old. Any of your other children also living at home at the time, or they gone off, or what?
Yeah, I do have. Well, I have. My older children are gone off, but my daughter on up was gone off. They were on their own away at school doing, their thing. But with I had three others there, and my niece.
Wow.
The three younger ones were home,
Okay.
and my niece as well. So they were there, but
Okay.
they were doing, their thing. They were doing what they were supposed to
Yeah.
do. And I do have a son that has cerebral palsy, so he was there. And one of the things is Chris was a lot of help with him.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
However, um, my son with cerebral palsy isn't. He's disabled, but he's not incapacitated. He moves around, he goes, he does, he lives alone right now.
Wow. Great.
Um,
Wow.
so it wasn't like, he needed round the clock care. That was an
Mhm.
excuse. That was
Okay.
Chris's excuse. I'll make sure he's good. And he would go to the doctor's appointments with me or whatever and him. But of course, Chris and this older sibling Chris is this tall, and the big brother is that tall.
Yeah.
So the big brother wasn't liking the fact that the baby brother. So
Yeah.
and Chris kind of felt whatever type of way he felt, and he just found solace in hanging out with his buddies on the block, and
Okay.
you
And
know,
that's like you said when he started getting into trouble with the law. And once again, we're not here to illustrate the problems he had with the law, but just to give maybe some examples of some of the
right.
trouble that he did. We're not going to go through all, everything. If there is a lot, I really don't know, but just maybe give the audience just maybe a little example of some of the trouble that he did get in with the law, if you can.
Well, he spent 18 months in jail twice. At one at 17, he was 17, and the next time again, he was probably 20, 21, 22, I think.
Okay.
But at 17 years old, nothing before that, of course, didn't have any police issues. One time my daughter went and picked him up from the jail. I would refuse. This is the route you're gonna go. I'm not going.
Yeah.
So my daughter went and got him. And at 17, he was caught in possession of a firearm. That's what I was told. He said it wasn't his. He said he was, they put it on him. You know how these young people, they put that on me.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't down there. I know he's hanging out down where he was hanging out down, which was a block away from where I live.
Okay. Yeah.
So at that time, and he claimed it wasn't his. He was the eldest. He said they just put it on me because I'm older and the other kids not, yet 17, whatever. 17, they could try you as an adult.
Right.
Or hold you for adult, accountability as an adult. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
That had to be so
and
hard,
it
Melody. I had
was,
to
it was
just.
hard, embarrassing, and to this day, it's still embarrassing. And it was hard. It was extremely hard. I worried about him there. He came home. Everything, was good. He wanted, I'm gonna do right. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Um, he stayed close to home. He stayed close to home after that, and nothing for years.
Okay.
No problems for years. So until I believe he was probably 24 the
Okay.
next time he went, 23 or
Okay.
24 maybe.
Same kind of issue with a gun or
No,
something
no,
different or.
no, no. A chain. He and another young guy were together, and one of the two snatched a necklace, a chain off of somebody, and there you go.
Yeah.
There
Okay.
you go.
So he went back to jail again.
Again, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy, but I think we just needed to maybe at least give a little bit, of what, you mentioned before. So I appreciate that. I know it's not easy to talk about. I do have to ask, when he was in jail, you said you wouldn't go pick him up when he got out. Would you go see him? Like, would you go
No,
see him in jail or talk to him
no,
like over the
no.
phone? Like it's no,
I
no.
talked to him over the phone. I did talk to
Okay.
him over the phone,
Okay. But you never went and
but
saw him in
no,
jail, like through the plexiglass
no.
or whatever they had, nothing like that.
The only time I've ever done that, I went to court, and and after court, they would let me go see him. Me and his dad go see him before they took him back, to jail. But and we would see each other through that glass. But to go to the actual jail where he was being, no, I refused to do it. I
Okay.
couldn't bring my heart to do that.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
hurtful, embarrassing, even going to court. And truthfully, I never talked about it much until now. I've never, even some of my closest friends, I never discussed that. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, and it's embarrassing, and it's just not what I pictured, not what I planned, for my children. I worked, I did what I was, at least I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do
Yeah.
in rearing them in the right direction.
Yeah. Did being that all of your other children were older, any help on that at all? Talking to him, any insight that that then talk to him about all this? I guess not, being that he went back to jail a second time, and it really, I guess, just a few years before he
We
went missing.
all tried to
And
talk to
was
them.
he just like total deaf to anything his older siblings might be able to tell him, or how do you look at that now?
Pretty much, yeah. It was, I have to hang out. His thing to me was, I have to exist here. You moved us out here. I have to exist out here. I have to build whatever relationships he needed to build, basically to survive. It was either go along with the craziness or get, I guess, beat up or beat down or have an altercation every day. And he was doing that going to school. He did develop whatever relationships, friendships with the people that he developed his friendships with. And, with the older kids, they were like, hey, you know, that's not it. But he's like, well, I live here, you don't, basically. It
Okay.
was one of those things. I live
Okay.
here, you don't.
All right. Thank you for sharing all that. I appreciate it. I know it's not easy to talk about. Let's move on to this. What about relationships with women? Of course, we're going to be talking about the woman who was in his life at the time of his disappearance, but what can you say about that? Of course, when he's not in jail, but in those times, did he meet anybody? Were there any women in his life, for example, that were going to see him in jail, or what do you know about that part of his life going into his 20s?
Well, I don't know if there were many. I don't know many. Now,
Hmm.
if he had many on it, he never brought them home.
Okay.
There were a couple of young ladies that I do know. Um, One in particular, I should be reaching out to her today, but I don't. She and my daughter kind of keep in communication, but she's just the sweetest. And I met her on occasion, and she really, really cared about Chris. And after that time when he ended up getting in trouble, the second time, she really, really wanted him to kind of move away. And, you know, they, live together or whatever, build a relationship.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, now this is her telling me this. This
Yeah,
was
right.
never
You're getting
Chris.
you're getting it her side. We're not getting his side. You're getting her side.
Right.
Sure.
This was never Chris giving me that deep of whatever, but I really liked her. I
Okay.
really liked her. And I just want to say, I'm just going to say her name was Trey.
Okay.
And I really liked her. Um, but, nothing came of that
Okay.
relationship as far as I know. I only met her on a couple of occasions.
Okay.
Um, he has a tattoo on him with a name, Sharon.
Mhm.
I know that he had a relationship with Sharon. Um, I never got a chance to know her. I never
Okay.
got a chance to know her. She was, I guess, shy and a little standoffish. So, and he didn't, I've always known if you bring him home and introduce him to mom, but I do know he liked her. He liked her. Other than that, I didn't know her very well.
Okay. What
Um,
about and I want to make sure I get the next name right. Is Akia? How do we say her name? The woman that he was with when he went missing. How do we say her name just to make sure?
Akea,
Akia.
Akea,
Okay.
Akea.
Let's talk about her. Just on how did do you know how they met? And how long had they been a couple? Of course, we're going to talk about how she was pregnant with his child at the time of his disappearance. Do you know how they met or how long they had been going out? What do you know about that?
You know what? I really don't know how they met. I'm not
Okay.
for sure how they met, but I do know she was a friend. She's a friend, niece of one of Chris's associates or friends or whatever.
Mm.
And so I do believe that's how they met,
Okay.
but
Makes
I'm
sense.
not for sure. I when Chris shared information in regards to this Atea,
Mhm.
and he just used to call me mom. Mom, he would call me and mom, I want you to meet my girlfriend. One of those things. I'm like,
Okay.
what girlfriend do you have now? I'm like, I used to mess with him, Kiki, because we have to talk about Kiki. But he was like, okay, okay. I'm like, you like those K names, don't you?
Huh.
And he was like, no, this girl, she she said she bought me a ring. I'm like, brought you a ring? She talking about it's a promise ring. And I just recently read those. It was actually text messages back and forth he and I engaged in. And I was looking at it a few days ago. And he
Mhm.
talked about how she bought him a ring, which she did, um, a black ring, just a band,
Okay.
and had his name engraved on it,
Wow.
Marlo.
Wow.
So I know little Marlo will get that ring one day.
Okay.
But he told me about it. Just talked very highly of her, and she was changing him. He was
Wow.
changed.
Wow.
He was actually
And
changing.
so you before his disappearance, you did meet her, and she was like over to your house, or not, or what?
No, and that was the funny part of it.
Huh.
I talked on the
Okay.
phone. I talked on the phone.
Okay.
Um, because of my work schedule and her work schedule, we didn't have an opportunity to meet until Chris went missing.
Okay.
We didn't meet face to face until Chris went missing.
All right. Well, and we'll surely get into that when we get to that. And I do have to ask you this: were you aware before he went missing that she was pregnant, or is that something you didn't find out
Yeah.
until after?
No, 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 no. He called me,
Did he?
Mom, Mom, I got something to tell you. I'm like, oh, here we go. What is it? Akea saying she's pregnant. I'm
I
like,
see.
Akea saying she's pregnant. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so what are you gonna do? Pregnant, how far is she?
Hmm.
And he was like, well, she's only like a few weeks at that time.
Okay.
But he did immediately let me know. I spoke with Akea on several occasions, and one of his worries was becoming and becoming he wanted Chris Chris was a father prior to he has an oldest son.
Okay. Right.
That's that
I knew that. Yes. Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
he was excited because he wasn't involved in his other son's
Okay.
birth, um, the pregnancy or anything. So this was exciting and it was something new for him and it was something that he felt, connected to and involved with. He was
Yeah.
going to the doctor's appointments. I have pictures of a picture of him sending me of the sonogram. It's a boy, it's a
Uh,
boy.
um,
And, it was one of those things. He was excited. And I think had he not gone missing, I really think that he would be very productive today.
okay.
He would be very much the man that I knew he could be because of Akea, the woman that she is. She's great. You know,
Yeah.
and
So you've told me, yes. You think very highly of her, yes.
yeah,
And she's doing a great job with your
she's
grandchild.
doing a wonderful job with him.
Fantastic.
She's doing a
Okay.
wonderful job. Her and her husband, they're doing
Oh, she got a
fantastic.
new guy.
She's
Okay.
married. Yeah.
And if you can remember, how far along in her pregnancy was she at the time of Chris's disappearance? How many months in, if you can remember?
Um, I believe. 6.5, maybe 7.
Okay, so pretty far, more than halfway.
Yeah,
More than halfway.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Maybe 6. Yeah, maybe 6 and 6.5, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, so those are things that are going on with Chris, and we're going to come back specifically to the year that he went missing. But I just want to go now. Of course, we follow outlines. Everybody knows we follow these outlines. We're just going to go through some people, and we're just going to talk about them in very general terms. Just some
Okay.
names I'm going to give to you, and all we're really looking for is had you ever heard of these people before? Is there any, proof that Chris knew any of these people? That's all we're looking for at this point, because later we're going to come back to these people much more specifically. First of all, I want to ask you about this young guy's name is Keyshawn, and I've seen his name spelled different places in different articles. I take it as Keyshawn. But had you ever heard of him before Chris went missing? Had Chris ever mentioned him to you? Do you think that there's any way that he and Chris would have crossed paths before, in the prior years, like to 2014, 2015? Had you ever heard of Keyshawn before?
I've never heard of him until after Chris went missing.
Okay.
They may have crossed paths
Mm-hmm.
because my address
Mm-hmm.
when I lived over there is only 2 blocks
Yeah.
west of where Keyshawn's address.
Okay.
You
Are
know,
we talking
so
about this Campbell Street area? Is that the
right,
that
correct,
general area
yeah,
that we're really going to get into eventually? So in this Campbell
right,
Street area of South Chicago, you've
correct.
discovered now that Keyshawn lived in that area. You and when Chris lived with you in that general area, but their paths might have crossed, but you in particular never heard anything like that.
I've never heard him. No, I've never heard of anything of that nature. His name, I never knew him.
Okay.
I never knew anything about him until after Chris went
Okay.
missing.
And I'll ask you this afterwards. Has anybody that you trust ever come up to you and said, "Oh yeah, Chris and Keyshawn used to hang out. Oh yeah, they knew each other." Anybody you trust ever come up and told you that since 2017?
No,
Okay,
no.
very good. All right, we're just going to keep it nice and simple for now. We'll move on to the next person. Her name is Shantae. I understand that she and Keyshawn were in a relationship. We'll get into that later. I know that's not your expertise, but we have to talk about it. Once again, any same questions? Had you ever heard of Shantae before Chris went missing? Could they have crossed paths? Were they ever a couple? Have you ever heard anything like that since Chris went missing?
No, all those names came up after Chris went missing, and never heard of her before. However,
Okay.
I did hear her story um on the news that a young lady was found, how she was found,
Okay.
but I heard that, but never in a connection. Never. I remembered after Chris went missing. I remembered, oh my gosh, that's the girl
Okay.
they found, you know. So
Okay,
never
but
heard of
just to
them.
be other than everybody's going to find out that she is deceased. In fact, she died before Chris went missing. Other than seeing her name in the news, that was it.
That was it.
Okay, very
That
good.
was
Let's move on to I will use her full name, Joanna Wright. She is also a missing woman. Did Chris know her? Had you ever heard of her before? Of course, before she went missing or before Chris went missing. If so, what can you say about that? Or is this another situation where you didn't know about her until after Chris went missing?
No, I knew Joanna. I met
Okay.
Joanna on a couple of occasions. Um, I do know she and Chris were friends, are friends. And actually, I'd been in her house and she's
Wow.
been in mine. You
Wow.
know, yeah,
That's how well you knew her and she knew you. Wow, she had actually
yeah,
been in your house. Wow.
yeah, yeah. She'd been at my house at a point. She didn't visit often, but she had come to my house, and I actually went to hers. I took my son to get his hair braided. She did. She was a loctician
Okay.
that I hear, and she did my son's locks.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing then you had a very favorable opinion of her. You thought, if you're taking your son to get his hair done there, then you must have had a very good opinion of her.
Well, they told me that she did hair and locks, and
Okay.
you know, gave me her address. I met her because she had been to my house. I met her, so I
Mhm.
knew who she was. I'm like, okay, she does locks. I'll take you, and that's how that was. And
Okay.
in my encounters with her, she was always respectful, and you know. But I didn't see them because I did not like in and out traffic
Mhm.
at my house. So
Yeah.
a lot of Chris's friends or people he hung around, they weren't at my house, and plus they thought I was mean. So I used that, you know. Some I didn't I that mask, and I just told my granddaughter this: if you walk around with a scowl on your face, people gonna think you're mean.
Yeah.
So I used to do that so people would think I was
Okay.
mean.
Yes.
And just hey, just
Yeah.
so just
Yeah. Well,
because.
it is Chicago. I mean, right?
Right.
It is Chicago. You didn't grow up in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania like I did, where,
Right.
everybody's a country bumpkin. This is Chicago.
So you
Chicago
have a
has a
different vibe
reputation
to
going
it.
back
Yeah.
150 years. So, yeah.
Right. So
Right.
so yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I knew Joanna
Okay.
pretty I would say my children knew her good. My children knew her well. Because we lived in a neighborhood, but she started seeing me, still speak, hey, all right, and I'll
Okay.
be back.
Any idea how Chris? So Joanna also in this what we were just going to call for now the Campbell Street area, also kind of from that area, then kind of.
Yeah, Joanna lived maybe 5 blocks west of me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And we also have to understand my understanding. Joanna and Chris knew each other, but she was quite a bit older than he was, right?
well,
It's not like they would have been running in the same age circles, correct? I don't have it right here in my notes, but my impression was she was at least 5 or 6 years older or something like
yeah, yeah, I believe so.
that. Okay.
I believe so. She was a few years old. I definitely know she was a few years older. I wasn't sure exactly how many years,
All right. I'm gonna
but
check that. I'm gonna check that right here for a second, just to make sure. Um, looks like it seems to me she was 33 years old when she went missing. And
yeah,
so, and now Chris is 33, so maybe 7 years older, six, 7 years older,
yeah.
something like that. The way
Yeah.
I'm calculating in my head. Any idea how the two might have met? And did
Probably
being
when
that she came over, Chris ever tell you this is how we met?
well, no, he never really told me how she met. I just assumed that it was on in the same neighborhood, on the block that they used to hang out on, which was a block away from me. I lived at 64th and Rockwell, and he used to hang out on 63rd and Rockwell. So, and that's
Okay.
where everybody hung out at. So I'm assuming that that's where he met us.
Okay, very
That,
good.
you know.
All right, so Joanne had been over your house. You knew her, but just to remind everybody, Keyshawn and Shantae never heard of them until after Chris went missing. Whereas with Joanna, she had actually been in your house and you had been in
Yeah,
her house
yeah.
before. Okay, very good. Let's move on to one more guy. He will become important later. Alan. This is a guy who was seemingly with Chris the night he went missing. Chris went missing. How well did you know Alan? Did Chris ever have him over to the house? Did you know him well at all? What can you say?
No, I've never heard of him, never seen him before. His name came up after Chris went missing. Immediately after Chris went missing.
Okay.
Before the police report went out that Chris went missing, his
Mhm.
name was brought up as the person that we needed to speak with because
Okay.
Chris was and he were together the night Chris went missing.
All right. So once again, Chris is around. You're seeing him, of course, in the year of his disappearance. And the way you remember it, once again, I realize it's been a while, but the way you remember it, Chris never brought up Alan's name at all.
Never brought his name up.
Okay, very good. Let's now move on. Maybe I should ask you this. In talking to Akia, like I know you have after the disappearance, did she know Alan? Had she ever heard of him before that night? Has she ever brought it up, if you can say?
No,
No.
she didn't know who he was.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to this. Now we're going to get into these people a little bit deeper, but we're just going to we realize, Melody, you are not an expert on any of these other occurrences. You are an expert on your son's disappearance. So we're just need to give an idea to the audience in a nutshell about what seemingly happened with Keyshawn, Shantae, and Joanna. We don't point fingers here. We're just telling as best as the news was able to say regarding what happened to these people.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Keyshawn in July 13th of 2016. What happened to him? He was actually murdered, shot right there in, I guess, the Campbell Street area. What can you say what did the news say about it? What have you learned about it?
Well, actually, I believe that it was Tallman Street. The street was like 6400 somewhere, 6400 South on Tallman, which is a few blocks from the Campbell area, the Campbell Street. So it was in that area that after Chris went missing, I found out that he was shot there.
Okay.
So, 6400 South on Tallman. He was murdered.
All right. Somebody came up, shot him, what we might say in cold blood, the way it is described. And do you remember in the news, seeing that in the news? You said you never heard of Keyshawn before, but now that you think back to it, do you think that registered to you that you knew somebody had been shot there or not?
No.
Okay.
Keyshawn's story, I didn't find out anything in regards to his story, his murder, or anything until after Chris went missing.
Okay.
Now, I do remember hearing on the news about Bohannon. I believe that was his girlfriend. I do remember hearing her stuff on the news once it occurred that, a body was found.
Right.
But I don't remember anything in regards to Keyshawn's story at all.
Okay. So there's some questions that I guess what we could take for granted is Chris never brought it up. If Chris knew about it, he never brought it up with you or seemingly anybody else. If he knew about it, maybe did know about it just because he's maybe hanging out in the area, but he never brought it up with you and never seemingly talked to anybody else about it.
To my knowledge, no.
No knowledge. Okay. But I have to ask, any proof or anything like that Chris or Alan or Akia or anybody else connected to Chris was actually in the area when this happened? Anybody enter, just in the general area, just hanging out when this happened? Any proof of that at all that you've ever heard?
Well, I just recently overheard that Chris was there.
Wow.
That day.
Okay.
And when I say recently, I mean like fresh a couple of weeks ago recently.
Wow. This year, 2024, the summer of 2024. Wow.
Yeah, that he actually, he was supposed to have been there and he was named as being there. Now, in the newspaper, I've done some research because I'm always looking back and I'm always, trying to figure it out because it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop with me.
Yeah.
And I read articles in regards to supposedly the article I read supposedly not named, but counted 17 to 19 people out there at the time of Keyshawn.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
So it's
I don't
certainly
know.
possible that Chris could have been in that
It
crowd, I guess.
could have been possible. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, but Chris never sent anything to you. And what we're also saying, this is not something where Keyshawn's just walking down the street by himself and somebody pulls up and shoots him. Actually, there were, and nobody sees it. You're saying that there were several witnesses to this.
Yeah.
The way you understand
Yeah.
it. Okay.
From my understanding and from the newspaper articles that I've read, it was several people there at the time of his murder.
Okay. And we should tell everybody we're doing this interview on August 20th of 2024. This murder is still unsolved, correct? We still don't know who shot and killed Keyshawn.
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Now, my understanding is that Shantae and Keyshawn were in some sort of relationship, but then she ends up very sadly deceased as well. What can you say? What has the news said regarding her death?
In regards to her death, I, they say that she was there present when Keyshawn was murdered, and she ran home. She went to her mom, and after that, she just stayed with her mom from the time that he was murdered until the day she decided to go grieve with the family.
Okay.
And I'm not for sure whether this was at repast after a funeral, after his services, or what, but I do know that the news stated that she ended up going to grieve with the family and made a call to her parents that a gun was being held to her head and she was being, and saying that they wouldn't let her leave. The people there wouldn't let her leave. And she let her family know exactly where she was at the house on 64th and Campbell. It's in the newspaper. Her mother spoke of it.
Yep.
And stated that she was afraid and they wouldn't let her leave and they had a firearm. The parents went there to, get their daughter.
Yeah.
And were told that she wasn't there. She had left by already. So the family, from my understanding, went straight to the police. And I did speak with Tammy, I forget her last name, but I had spoken with Shantae's mother when Chris went with me.
Okay.
Because everybody was trying to make a connection and saying that, Chris's stuff was connected.
Okay.
So however, I did talk with Bohannon's mom briefly, and she went straight to the police after they told her daughter left the home.
Mm-hmm.
Police said, and the same thing they told me, maybe she's out blowing off the steam, maybe she's getting some fresh air, maybe she's, just taking a break, getting a breather right now, and refused to do a missing person report, refused to follow through with their concern that their daughter may be in danger.
Right.
So a few days later, I believe it was a few days passed before they decided to go with a search warrant to that house to look for Shantae.
Okay.
And from my understanding, turned up nothing. Days later, a week later, or whatever, they find the poor baby in a garage, deceased.
Once again, what we say in that general area of Campbell Street, this 6400 block, kind of in the same area. The way you're familiar with the area, I've never been there, but all in the kind of the same area. Or what would you say, being the local?
Actually, the location where they found her was quite a ways away from.
It was
the area, yeah.
Okay.
It was a few miles away from the area.
Okay. But where she allegedly went, which is to Keyshawn's family's house, is right there, and once again in that area that we've talked about, Campbell Street, 6400 block, right in there. But she was found quite a ways away.
Right. So in that area, Campbell, Rockwell, and that's the
Right.
Marquette Park area.
Okay, very good.
And yeah, that's Marquette Park area. And Shantae was found well outside of that area.
Okay. Now we should note, though, she's deceased. Very sad, but has her death actually been called a murder, or was it undetermined? What is your understanding regarding
My understanding is she was murdered.
it? Okay. All right, that's your
She was
okay.
murdered.
Okay, but she wasn't. I guess what we're saying is she wasn't shot like Ken Sean was. It was. It could be some other way. It's not like she was
It
shot
could
like he
be
was.
right. It could be some other way. The newspapers is saying undetermined. They don't know how she died. Then
Okay.
police or the coroner at the time didn't know the cause of death.
Okay.
But she was stuffed in a trash can
Okay.
in an
All right.
abandoned garage.
Oh my. All right.
So
So
it
that would
was
lead you to believe if she's in a trash can, that would lead us to believe that somebody had something to do with this.
traumatized. Yeah, somebody had something to do with. She didn't throw herself in there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. Very good. Okay. That's I think just to get an idea. And once again, this happened not long after Ken Sean was murdered, was shot, killed. Like
yeah,
less than a month later, this all happened with
yeah,
Shantae.
yeah.
Now let's move up, of course, to a woman you do know, and that was Joanna, because she went missing. And I'll ask you first this. Do you remember when this happened? Being that you knew Joanna, you'd taken one of your sons to have his hair done over there. Do you remember like that day or hearing about this? What were your first reactions? Do you remember that?
I do. Chris actually texted me,
Hmm.
and he texted me that Joanna went missing, and I'm like, who? And I was looking at the text messages not long ago, but I still have those. I'm like, who? He said, and the gay girl with the red hair. I'm like, oh, because at that time, though I knew Joanna, I met her, I never knew her name as Joanna.
Huh.
I knew her as JoJo.
Okay. All
I
right.
was introduced to her as JoJo. And I'm like, Joanna, who is that? He's like, the gay girl, JoJo. I'm like, oh, let's say JoJo. Y'all introduced me to her as JoJo. These people call them, don't switch the names up.
Hmm.
But he texted me and said she had gone missing, and it was he saw it on somebody called him. A girl reached out to him and told him that was going on, that had happened. And I said, okay. He said it might be on the news. I said, okay, well, I'll be on the lookout. I'll watch. So that later on, about a half an hour or so later, he called me and said, "Ma, it's on the news now. It's on the news. They're talking about it." And I watched the news, and it was unbelievable. I'm like, how do people go missing? It
They
was one
do.
of those
Yeah.
in broad daylight.
Yeah.
I mean, it just didn't seem real to me.
Right. And do you have any idea how Chris he himself found out about this?
Yeah, he stated that one of the friends, a girl, called him or texted him that was still over in the neighborhood and, let him know that. Because Chris wasn't there.
Yeah.
He is tried staying away
Right.
from the neighborhood.
Right. And we're certainly going to establish that when we get to his disappearance, that he was not in this neighborhood anymore. But what we're saying is that the way it is understood this disappearance happened is Jojo or Joanna was just walking down the street, broad daylight, once again in kind of this Campbell Street area, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Right in that area. And a witness said that a car pulled up with an out of state license plate, maybe from Ohio, and three guys jumped out, grabbed her, and threw her into this car and took off. Correct? Is that the way you also understand
Yeah,
that the way it was
yeah.
described?
That's how it was described in the newspapers. That's how it was described um,
Hmm.
from her sister to me.
Okay.
And so, yeah,
Okay.
in
Very
broad
good.
daylight.
All right, and of course, her disappearance still unsolved. All right, so we have a Ken Sean's murder unsolved, Shantae's murder unsolved, Joanna's disappearance unsolved, all kind of once again in the same area, even though we know Shantae was eventually found some distance away, but the last place she was seen was once again in that area. When Chris, when Chris had the chance to process all of this, did he ever pass along to you why he thought somebody would have abducted Joanna, being that he knew her? Any insight by Chris at all?
No, he didn't know because I asked, I'm like, who would do that? What's going? He never mentioned to me what's going on, or never mentioned what his thoughts were on why this occurred. He
Okay.
was like, I don't know, I don't even know what they're saying out there in regards to, her going missing. But he said once he found out, he was going to reach out and see if some of his friends had any idea as to what was going on, and he would, call me back or give me that information. But the only thing that he came up with that he told me was that you know what? Honestly, I don't even remember his explanation as to why or what went on. I know he was concerned and he didn't know. He would always ask, did I watch the news? Did you watch the news? Did you hear anything? Different things like that. And I would ask him the same, hey, did you ever hear anything about what happened with JoJo? He was like, no, when I reach out, nobody knows anything. But they said there were witnesses out there.
Okay.
There were witnesses.
Yeah.
There's supposed to have been a video of the abduction. So with that information, I'm not for sure what's going on. And originally, I believe he did tell me that it was some people that had recorded it, a video, and hopefully that would help. But no
Still
one knew
unsolved.
anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So Chris, once again, be very specific. He never said to you, his mother, and said, "Here is the reason I think somebody abducted Joanna." Did he ever say anything like that?
No, never.
No. Okay. Let me ask you this once again before we get to Chris's disappearance. I know it's been a long time coming for everybody listening, but we had to go through all of this very in detailed form. At the time, as best as you can tell, just maybe to put these dates together for everybody, we had Ken Sean, who got murdered on July 13th of 2016. About 11 days later is when Shantae went missing, seemingly murdered, and then her body was discovered sometime after that. And then on December 18th of 2016, so approximately 6 months later, is when Joanna was abducted from the street, this Campbell Street area of Chicago. And of course, her disappearance is unsolved. I will ask you, at that time, as best as you can tell, did anybody think about Ken Sean, Shantae, and Joanna and think, could this all be connected somehow at that time? Any idea if anybody ever thought all of this was connected?
I don't know. I don't know because I didn't know about. The only thing I knew at that time was Joanna went missing.
Okay.
That's all I knew.
Okay.
I
The other one's
knew,
not on your radar as much.
right. I never found out anything about Ken Sean until after Chris went missing. Bohannon,
Yeah.
Shantae Bohannon.
Yeah.
Now, in a million years, would have even thought that possibly could have been connected in association with Joanna, Chris, or at all with Chris at all. I don't say with Chris.
Let me just ask you a little bit about that area, being that you lived in the area that is, we're hearing about, of course, Ken Sean getting murdered. We're hearing about Shantae getting murdered. We're hearing about this kidnapping of Joanna, all with very close to each other. Is that area of Chicago? Of course, everybody who doesn't live there, we hear all these very bad stories coming out of Chicago, but we realize that, it's not every single block on which this is happening in Chicago. There's just certain areas. How would you portray that particular area of Chicago, maybe before this all happened, the way you understand it? Does this kind of stuff always going on, or how would you say it was a safer neighborhood? How would you explain it?
Well, like I said, I moved from the west side of Chicago. I've
Mhm.
lived my entire life to that side. It was a little bit louder. There was a pod, the police pod, surveillance video cameras on the corner.
Okay.
I never experienced seeing that before. Um, but for the most part, I didn't think that it was that bad.
Okay.
When I lived over there, it didn't appear to me as being that bad.
Okay.
Um, Maybe because I went to work
Mhm.
and went home, went in the house. I didn't hang out with the people in the neighborhood. I didn't know a lot, unless my next door neighbor. But I didn't know a lot of people in the neighborhood. I didn't become familiar with a lot of people there. So I really didn't hear a lot of the going ons over in the area from different people other than my children. And of course, they don't give us the whole full,
Right.
rundown on
Right.
everything going on.
I
So
guess
I
what
didn't
I'm
know as bad
yeah.
as it was.
I guess what I'm saying is if you're reading the news and it sounds like you are a news reader, it wasn't like you were reading about your own neighborhood all the time being in the
Right.
news because of
No.
some shooting or something.
Right, exactly. I
Okay.
didn't.
Okay. And I think this is very important for everybody to understand. So we might look at this in a situation that's pretty, maybe just an average Chicago neighborhood. Then all of a sudden, Ken Sean gets murdered. All of a sudden, Shantae gets murdered. All of a sudden, Joanna goes missing, all with it over the course of 6 months, even though this kind of stuff maybe doesn't happen in that neighborhood usually.
Right. Well, I at that time when those things were occurring, I
Hmm.
wasn't living in Chicago anymore.
Right.
When Chris went missing, I wasn't
Yeah.
living in Chicago anymore.
Yeah.
When Joanna and Kenshawn
Hmm.
and Shante, I wasn't living in Chicago at that time. So what made me honestly move from the area, different things start unraveling, and just behind me there was a murder. Just on the corner there was a
Okay.
murder, and
So,
I'm like, it's time to go. So that had to be in probably 2011. I decided, you
okay.
know what? That's too close to home. I step out my door and there's a body on the corner, so
All right. So what you're saying is this is a maybe a more a section of Chicago where you maybe had to watch yourself.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so it
yeah,
was that. So maybe these things maybe aren't totally out of the norm then.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Maybe we should clarify that. So you had not lived in that area since 2000. What year, please?
I believe I moved away in 2011. I
All right.
moved over there 2010 or 2010. I think I moved from over there.
Okay.
I Yeah, I stayed there 6 years prior to me moving. Yeah. So I hadn't lived there. I think I lived in that area for 6 years. For 6 years before I moved from over there.
Okay. So just so we're putting this a timeline. So you're saying you moved to that general area in 2005 then?
Yeah.
All right. And
Yep.
you lived there to 2011, and then you started hearing and seeing these things, and it's
Yep.
like, you know what? I
Oh.
think it's time for me to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. And so let's now move on to this. Let's now get back, of course, to Chris exclusively. The way you remember it for the year 2017. So those things all happened in 2016. We go into 2017. How was that year going for Chris as best as you could tell? Now, we understand he's still like in the Chicago area, not in the Campbell Street area, but in Chicago, you're out of Chicago. How, in your impression, how were things going? Any problems? Did he express any fears? Anything?
Um, for the most part, it went well. The earlier part of the year, it was going well. He and Akea, they were in a relationship.
Mhm.
Um, he stayed with his dad for a few months. and he was kind of getting away from that area. He was gravitating away from the area, and his mindset was changing. He
Okay.
wanted to go to work. He wanted to do right. He wanted to do better. And during those times, I saw that he meant that. And he decided, to just, it's time to grow up. It's
Okay.
time to grow up. And he and Achaia came in existence, and
Yeah.
they ended up getting an apartment together.
Right.
And
And it's very important. They didn't live anywhere near Campbell Street. To my, as best as I could tell, they moved like well to the east of that.
yes, they moved to the east of Campbell Street, quite a ways away, a few miles
Yeah.
away,
Yeah.
and you know that's where they were. That's where they were.
Okay.
And the thing about it is, Chris kind of stayed away from the area for quite some time. I didn't understand. I didn't know why, but it's kind of making a little bit of sense right as we speak. But he stayed away, and the only thing that brought him back to that area was the death of one of his friends.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to, and that's D Mike, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
we're gonna get to that in a second. So he's out of the air. Chris is totally out of the area. He's with Akia. That's the new woman in his life. They're getting along well. We've already talked about how she was pregnant, about 6 months pregnant. So the baby would have been conceived right there in 2017. He's excited about that. Of course, he's been a father before, but it sounds like he's gonna have much more to do. He wants to going to be more involved this time around, maybe in a better relationship or something like that. He's excited about these things, and he's well out of the area, away from where Ken Sean and Shantae and all the stuff with them with Joanna, all that happened. He's out of that area. So maybe 2017, maybe the best year he's had in a while.
yeah, pretty much,
Okay,
pretty
very
much.
good.
And it's
All
sad to
right, I
say,
just want to make sure that we understand that. And I have to ask, was he working? What I know that Akia had a job or something. What was he doing with his time?
well, he started contacting um temp companies to
Mhm.
work temporary jobs.
Okay.
And I do know that he, months before he went missing, he did sign up for some programs that my niece had given him in regards to um, temp jobs where they would pick you up, you meet at a location, and they take you out to the job location.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was doing that for a little while.
Okay. Good. And then she had some sort of job as well, like like
Yeah,
not a temp job like he was doing, but like an everyday job with the same
yeah,
company or
that,
something.
yes, yes.
Okay.
In housing management, which she still does today.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very good. Let's move on to this. You've already mentioned it. The murder of a guy's nickname, D Mike. And I understand he was murdered just a month before Chris went missing in September, as best as you can tell. Now, this is not unsolved. Somebody did get caught and is in jail. Any idea why this happened? Did Chris ever pass along to you? This is why D Mike was shot. What can you say about the murder of D Mike?
um, it's all the person that did
Yeah,
it did turn himself in.
yeah.
Um, I'm not for sure if he's released right now. I've heard that he may be released. He may be home from his
Wow.
stay in prison.
Hmm.
I don't know why. It was just, from my understanding, a little petty argument or something,
Okay.
disagreement that didn't even result, should not have ever resulted to this,
Okay.
to the murder.
Okay.
But yeah, something minor. So
Just got out of control between two guys, and the one happened to have a gun and used it.
yeah, from my understanding, yeah.
Okay. Now you didn't know. Of course, we're going to come back to Alan eventually, but you knew D Mike, right? He had been over to your house. He was like one of those guys that Chris did have over to your house.
Right.
Favorable attitude.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
opinion of
Very
Mike.
nice. Yeah. Very nice young man, and um he appeared to be a quiet type of guy to me. He was very respectful in my house. He was
Okay.
um just soft spoken guy and just very mannerable.
Okay.
Very mannerable.
And I guess when you found out that he had been murdered, I guess that must have really, shocked you. Just like when you found out that Joanna went missing, this must have been just another one of those. I can't believe this happened.
Yeah, yeah. And it really did something to me with D Mike because I saw what it was doing to Chris.
Yeah.
I understand, you know, I you as a parent you seem to absorb your children's pain.
Yeah.
And that really Chris it really pained him. It really hurt him to his core that had happened. And he wasn't around and he could just call me crying. He called me crying and I couldn't console him,
No.
so and we're talking a grown man, but that really did something to his soul that had happened. And the reasoning behind it, he said for nothing, just for nothing.
Yeah.
One of those it it was for nothing. And it hurt him really bad and D Mike's um death is what really brought Chris back into that neighborhood.
And on that note, where, best as you know, where was D. Mike murdered? Was it in that Campbell Street area or was it somewhere else? Do you know?
Um, I want to believe that it was. I believe it was on Tallman. It was in that area. Yeah.
It was
It was.
within a
Yeah. It
few
was.
blocks of what we're talking, the 6400 block at Campbell. This is what you've called the Marquette area of Chicago. It was in
Correct.
that particular area.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And was there like a funeral or something that they all went to or Chris went to and took part in this? Because I know you've sent me a picture. Is that picture from the funeral of
From the
D
cemetery.
Mike or was it from
Yeah.
something else?
That was from D Mike's funeral.
Okay.
Yeah. There
Okay.
was a funeral, and from my understanding and my recollection, that was Chris's first time back in that area. I'm not for sure exactly where the service was held, but it brought him amongst those friends again, those associates again.
Okay. So
You
once
might
again,
say
to
that.
go through this for everybody, Ken Sean murdered in that area. Shantae seemingly murdered in that area, although she was found at some distance away. Joanna goes missing in that area, and then the next year, D. Mike murdered in that area. But the big difference is his murderer was caught, has spent some time in jail. Of course, it's now been 7 years. You say maybe he's getting out. I would hope he would be in longer than that, but maybe not. But that murder was solved, but these other three before it unsolved, but all still in
Oh,
that area.
right.
All right, so that brought Chris back to that area, if only for the funeral itself. Let's now move up to this time. We're now into October of 2017. And my understanding is the days before Chris going missing, it was Chris and the mother of his child, who was going to have his child just a few months later. Um, they're actually in that area because her family or somebody lives once again, and we're talking about this Campbell Street area, correct?
It's the area, yeah. Yeah, it's Campbell Street area. It's only the location on where they were
Yeah, please.
um visiting, maybe 5 blocks, 6 blocks from Campbell. So,
Okay.
and it's ironic that the address to all of these locations
Mm.
happen to be 6400
Wow.
block of, so Akaya's family members lived on 64th and I believe Washington, which is only a block away from where um, I guess Kenchan was murdered.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so all once again very close. We understand Chicago's a huge city. Uh like maybe the third, maybe it's fourth now due to Houston, but third or fourth largest city in the United States. It's a huge area, but this is all so this is what makes this all so unusual is that this is all very concentrated in a very small part of Chicago. You know, like a square mile or something, even smaller than that.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So let's move up to this day of the disappearance. My understanding is that Chris and Akia were going to go home, but then Chris had to go back. Why don't you get into what your understanding is there?
Okay, so Akea they were gonna go home. They were there for the weekend. It was her birthday weekend. I believe her birthday is the um I don't even want to make a mistake, but it was
She'll
October. Let
forgive
me
she'll forgive you. Akea
yeah,
will forgive you, I'm sure. But somewhere around October 5th, 6th,
yeah,
somewhere in there.
yes, yeah, right.
Okay.
Somewhere in between October 5th or 6th or something
Okay.
in that nature. And they were there and they stayed throughout that weekend. And she decided, you know what, I'm gonna go home. We have this doctor's appointment coming up soon, but I have to go to work tomorrow, so I'm going home.
Okay.
And she went on home. Chris stayed behind.
Hmm.
Chris stayed.
Okay.
Um, and he hung out with, from my understanding, he was with one of his friends, Matthew,
Okay.
and Mookie, which is the Allen
Alan.
guy.
And
Yeah,
what's his nickname again, please? What's his nickname?
Mookie.
Mookie. All right. Very good. Thank you. Please continue. So we're going to talk about Matthew eventually. So, but Chris is with this guy, Matthew. Do you know Matthew? Did you know who he was? Or
You know what? Here's the thing in regards to these Chris's little friends. I call them Chris's little friends. Some of them I've heard their names before.
hmm
D Mike and maybe a couple more I've actually met.
Okay.
Now, um, my my daughter and a couple of my other sons, they know them. They're familiar with who these friends of Chris's are.
Okay.
Me personally, I don't. I told you they thought I was mean, so they stayed the heck away
Yes.
from me.
Yes.
And
Yes.
especially since we've already established that they were out there doing, you know, not so nice things.
Yeah.
They definitely stayed away
Okay.
from me.
Gotcha. Maybe
But
they wanted to stay away from you just for that mere fact. That.
right,
Okay.
right. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I didn't know them, you know,
Okay.
personally or anything. If they came up to me and said hi, I would say hi, but I wouldn't know who I'm saying hi to. It's one of those. I
Right.
didn't know. I couldn't put a face with a name. So that's
Right.
how well I know his friends.
Right. Now, in a prior conversation, Melody, and of course, a woman who's been helping you, Stormy, we had these conversations. There was something about a phone charger that popped up in that discussion regarding the day of Chris's disappearance. Why don't you maybe explain that?
Okay, so the situation with the phone charger was accidentally left at Akaya's uncle and aunt's house. Akaya and Chris spent the weekend there for her birthday, and um, it was left there. They parted ways. Akaya ended up going home. Chris stayed in the area to hang out with a couple friends, but he realized he left his charger at the house, at
Okay.
the aunt. So he ended up calling Akea to let her know, hey, I left my charger. Can you ask your aunt to hand it to me out the window? So Chris and Mookie, they were together at this time. end up going back to the house to get the charger. The charger was passed to Chris. He contacted Akay and say, "Hey, I got the charger. I'm good. So, I'm just gonna hang out for a little while and I'm gonna call you back." He said, "Well, you know what? Let me know." So, because I believe that she was gonna send an Uber. They were gonna get an Uber so he would go home.
Okay.
And she said, "Just let me know, so I'll be up. If I might fall asleep, but just give me a buzz when you're ready and on your way."
Okay.
And
So once again, we have to remind everybody, Mookie is this guy, Alan. And any idea even to this day how Alan and Chris ended up hooking up that evening, that night? Did one text the other, or do we even know?
that, I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know. From my understanding, it wasn't just Mookie. It was actually Matthew and Mookie.
Okay.
Matthew went his way. Chris and Mookie continued to hang out
Okay.
at Mookie's house.
Okay. And we have to remember that, once again, we don't know how these guys all ended up running into each other. Very well could be that it could be something totally innocent. Absolutely. We're
Yeah.
not saying anything suspicious went on here, but we really don't know specifically, being that Alan is still around. He's never specifically said to you, Chris texted me telling me he was in the neighborhood and that's how we met. That's never, nothing like that kind of explanation.
No, no. Well, he never said that to me.
Okay,
Um,
that's all I'm asking you, if he ever said it to you, because you're
yeah,
right at
he
this point.
never.
Maybe you're the only person we can trust. So he never said it to you.
No, he never said it to me.
All right,
No.
that's very good. Now, my understanding also, though, is that right around in this time, Chris actually FaceTimes with Akea, correct?
No.
All
He
right,
actually
who did he
FaceTimed.
FaceTime with?
He FaceTimed with Kiki, his eldest son's mom.
Oh, okay, very good. Please, yeah, please explain that,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. Kiki is his eldest son's mother,
Okay.
and he was actually on a FaceTime conversation with her.
Huh.
And she said that they were walking down the street. Chris happened to call her. He typically called her often, and they communicated. She said that he was walking down the street with a guy. She didn't know. She never saw the guy in the frame,
Okay.
but he was, they were walking down the street and he was just teasing her, messing with her. "I'm coming to your house after I leave this guy," or whatever. And they talked for quite a while, maybe about 15 minutes or so.
Wow.
And the call abruptly ended. She said Chris looked up, from the phone and say, "Hey, let me call you back," and hung up. And that was it, from her conversation. But during the time she was on the phone with Chris, she knew that he was with somebody. He did communicate with somebody,
Okay.
and she just never saw exactly who it was.
Okay. And so he's just walking down the street, once again in this Campbell Street area, 6400 block that we keep talking about. He's with somebody. The belief is that it was with Alan, but Alan was never seen in the frame, right?
Right.
The way she remembered. The way you understand this, how often did Chris speak with Kiki?
A lot.
A
A
lot?
lot. Very
Okay.
close to the family. And she kept in contact with me often. Very nice girl. She's basically part of the family,
Okay,
you
very good.
know.
Does she live in that area, or does she live somewhere else in
No, she
Chicago or
lived.
somewhere else?
No, she lived in one of the Chicago suburbs.
Okay. So
So she
nowhere
didn't
near
live
where Chris was at all.
near where Chris was at all. No.
Okay.
So,
Was she able to tell you what they talked about? I mean, 15 minutes. Of course, they have a child together, so maybe that was at least part of the conversation. But was there anything about the conversation that she thought to be unusual that she's ever told you?
she didn't. The only thing that she said that he was just teasing her about coming by the house, and
Huh.
she was getting on. Why you coming by? You got a baby on the way, and don't get me involved in anything crazy. And you need to quit playing with me, basically.
Okay.
And he was like, I'm outside your door. I'm coming. I'm coming to your house now. I'm
Okay.
outside the door. Look out the window, stuff like that. He said, and she looked out. No, Chris. Yeah, I'm just one of
All
those
all
things.
right. So
But
you said he was a jokester. I mean, you did
yeah,
say he was like to joke around, so that makes
yeah.
sense.
But the thing that kind of caught her attention was the way he looked up. He looked up in almost a startled way from
I
her
see.
explanation, from what she said. And
Okay.
he abruptly ended the call. He, like, somebody just walked in his, you know,
Hmm.
eyesight. She just said he abruptly looked up and, in a startled like manner.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, very good. Thank you. That's pretty good information there. So he ends this FaceTime abruptly, but once again, she doesn't actually see who is with him.
Right.
Could she even get the idea if it was a man or a woman? Did
It
she
was a
even?
man with
It
them.
was a man.
Yeah,
Okay.
she definitely know it was a man because she
Okay.
heard his voice.
Okay. Very good. So Alan claimed, I mean, Alan, though, has claimed he was with Chris that night. And so I guess Alan was the guy that was with Chris while this FaceTiming was going on. What is Alan's story? We'll get to how this all came into the picture and everything. But what is his story, I guess, after this FaceTime call ended? What's Alan's story?
Well, personally to me, because I've had a personal conversation with him.
Okay.
I've had a personal conversation with him, and from his story, from his, what he told me is Chris met up with a girl. It was a
See.
girl. He and Chris was walking down 64th Street in the direction of Campbell Street
Okay.
from Rockwell. Rockwell is maybe 2 blocks west of Campbell. So they was walking east on 64th Street. And Chris met up with a girl. He was going to meet a girl. And he met up with a girl and they parted ways. This is the story that Mookie has told me.
Okay.
And, one of the things that make me feel uncomfortable about Mookie and him knowing what occurred with my son is his explanation of he was the last person to see
Right.
Chris alive.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
what those are
That
the words.
person's always going to be a question mark, and it's
Yeah,
always going to be a question mark, of course.
yeah.
These situations. Now, Alan says that they were walking along, and this woman appeared. And what is her name?
Brandy Jones.
Okay, and we should know
Um,
that that's not exactly her name, though, but that is the name that is out there,
that's the
right?
name. Right. That's the names that's out there.
Right.
Brandy
I guess
Jones.
it's at least a little bit of an alias, right? Kind of a.
Yeah.
Okay.
From my understanding from law enforcement, yeah, that's not her
Okay.
name.
Okay. All right. But that's the name we got.
That's the
And
name.
all right. So Alan says, and maybe Alan actually knows the woman's real name, but he claims they're walking along, and this woman, Brandy Jones, just, I guess, appears out of nowhere. And Brandy and Chris walk off, and Alan never sees Chris again. Is that his story?
That's the story. His
Okay.
story is I was the last person to see your son alive. That's his story.
All right. We're
That's
going to come. Okay.
anything.
Okay. But he's saying he met up with Brandy Jones. Chris met up with Brandy, and they left together. But he also said something about Chris being or not being alive.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Because I was angry and I questioned him. He had already been questioned a
Mhm.
few days prior by Chris's dad, and people from the neighborhood that went knocking on doors trying to figure out, what's going on.
Yeah.
Where's Chris? So I don't know the conversation and his verbiage that he used with anyone else. I know the verbiage he used with
Right.
me.
Right. And
And
that's what we're gonna stick to because you heard it firsthand, and if you're hearing it from other people, even the police,
right,
who knows what they're leaving in and keeping out and everything else.
absolutely.
All Ellen tells you is they were walking along and this Brandy Jones appears and Chris and Brandy go off together. And he says, I'm the last person who saw Chris alive.
Correct.
All right.
Now, from his point of view to me, as well, his explanation, he never saw the girl. He knew it was a girl. He never saw her face, is what he told me.
Huh. All right.
So,
So if
how
Brandy
this,
was put in a lineup, he would not be able to pick her out necessarily.
from what he told me, he
Yeah.
couldn't. Yeah. From what
Right.
he told me, he could. Now, I wasn't present when the initial search and conversations with Mookie happened. I'm not, my, Chris's dad thinks he's an idiot. So,
Well,
it is
we
what,
don't care about. We're just saying what he told you, and that's his
right.
story. All right, that's all.
Exactly.
He said he met up
That's
with a girl, and did he say the name Brandy Jones?
no, he never told me
He
that
never
name.
said the girl's name.
Right.
Okay,
Mookie
so
never said that name to me.
all right, that's very important. Very, very important. He said he met up with a girl, but Ellen never used the name Brandy Jones. In fact, he didn't use any name at all.
He didn't use a name at all.
Okay. In your opinion, in talking to Alan, was Alan surprised that this woman was there, no matter whatever her name was, Jane Doe or Jennifer Aniston or anything else? Was he surprised that this woman showed up and the two walked off, or did Alan seem to think that this was something that was like pre-planned? Once again, his impression.
Yeah, from my understanding and from his explanation to me,
Mm-hmm.
he knew that Chris supposedly was going to meet up with the girl.
Okay.
Before they set off in a direction, supposedly that was the whole idea of them walking down 64th was about. To walk with Chris, and Chris was meeting up with a girl. That's what Mookie said to me.
Okay. And it wasn't until later that this Brandy Jones name came up.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right. We'll get into how that all uh, first occurred, how that all occurred. But at the time, he just says, we're walking along late at night. He got off this FaceTime, and there was a woman there. Chris met up with this woman. They leave, and Alan went above, just left.
Right. Now,
Okay.
at this time that I met up with, at the time when I met up with Mookie,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know the name Brandy Jones.
Okay.
I was unaware of this name. I didn't know the name. I just knew a girl. He's supposed
Okay.
to met up with a woman. Now, a couple of days prior, in the presence of Chris's dad, there was a picture brought up in regards to Brandy Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and there was Chris's friends and saying different things in regards to her. So she had been brought up, but at the time when Mookie was explaining to me the girl that Chris met up with, I didn't know a name or anything. I didn't know what this woman looked like, and I definitely didn't know the name because Mookie
Okay.
claimed he didn't know who she was.
Okay. So we'll come back to this, but we'll just try to keep this in order. So when does it become obvious that something is wrong, that Chris went missing? Was it the next day? When did you realize it? When did Ikea realize it? Did somebody else realize it first? What were some of those red flags regarding this disappearance that first caught your or her attention?
When Ikea called me and told me Chris wasn't answering the phone, which was just about probably midnight
Wow.
that night. And she
Huh.
asked me if I could reach out and see if he'd, answer my calls. He said, "No, I answer my calls, and you know, I don't know what's going on, but he's not answering my calls, and I'm trying to, I'm getting sleepy, and I'm trying to wait up for him, so we can get the Uber for him.
Yeah.
So that's when I'm like, this boy, I'm like, this girl pregnant, and you want to play games. So I started reaching out to Chris, and the calls were going unanswered. I thought it was just a man just ignoring a phone call.
Yeah.
I didn't think anything of it at that time. He's out and about. Maybe she was gonna call, hassle him about when you coming in, and he didn't want to be bothered. Is why I thought he wasn't answering the phone.
Okay.
And she thought the same. She thought the same, and reached out and asked me, "Hey, maybe he'll answer your call, maybe. So can you just tell him I'm not gonna wait up all night?" And
Okay.
I wasn't getting an answer.
So when did it become obvious this was more than Chris not just answering his phone, that this was more than that? When did that start?
When I woke up the next morning, for work, I said, let me call this boy and get on him because he better be in the house. So it's 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, whatever. And I called, and the phone just rang, 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 rang. I'm like, really? So I called Akea. I'm like, Akea, did that boy get back in contact with you? Is he there? Said, Ma, he's not answering the phone. He's still not answering. He hasn't answered all night. I've been up trying to call him.
Okay.
So after I tried calling him a few more times, I end up calling Kiki. And I'm
Okay.
like, called her. I'm like, Kiki, have you heard from Chris? She's like, yeah, I was on FaceTime with him last night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He was messing with me, talking about he was by my house and everything. He was working with some guy. But I don't know at the time. She said, I don't know where exactly he was.
Mm-hmm.
So she said that he told her, I'm by your house, and had me looking out the window. But yeah, I was on FaceTime with him last night. Last night about what time? And she looked it up and she said, we got off of FaceTime at about 11:50.
Wow.
Yeah, about 11:50. I'm like 11. Oh, I'm like, okay. I said, okay, I'm gonna give you a call back.
Mm-hmm.
So I called Akea back, and I talked to Akea. I'm like, Akea, what was the last time? When was the last time you talked to Chris? And I asked her, did she have the exact time that she talked to him? So, I was just wondering. So apparently, the last time that Chris had any communication with anybody was with Kiki.
Yeah.
That FaceTime conversation with
Right.
Kiki was the last communication anyone had ever had with Chris.
Okay. And we need to remind everybody this, she says it ended at 11:50 p.m. I'm certainly believing that. And you call him around midnight
Yeah,
and the phone just keeps ringing. So something happened in those 10 minutes.
yeah.
Okay. Does anybody contact Akea's, I guess it would be her aunt and uncle, whoever it was in the area, to call them that next day? Do you even know to even call Alan or Matthew, any of these people, once again, that immediate day after?
Yeah, okay, I did call her uncle
Okay.
and her aunt and to find out whether Chris had came back there,
Hmm.
and he had not. But that's when it was stated the uncle, I want to say, told Akea that he was hanging out with some friends and the friend's name. So we end up finding out Matthew, which was one of the friends, and
Yeah.
Mookie. My daughter reached out to. She ended up reaching out to a person in the neighborhood that knows Matthew.
Okay.
And he asked, hey, do anybody have Matthew's phone number? And the young lady said, well, Matthew is sitting right here.
Huh.
So,
Well,
yeah.
that's convenient.
So, yeah. So my daughter spoke with him, and Matthew told my daughter, well, I left Chris, they call him Marlo. That's Chris's real name.
Right. That's of course.
Chris is a middle name. So he
Yeah.
said, Marlo with Mookie. I'm going to give you the number, and gave us Mookie's phone number.
Okay.
And my daughter ended up getting Matthew's number at the same time. So she ended up getting Matthew's number from himself. He said, give me a call back. And when she called Mookie, she ended up calling Mookie, and Mookie's response was, "See, I'm not going to be involved in this. I'm not taking a fall for none of this shit," or something to that effect. I'm sorry,
Really?
but yeah, and it was rebound back to, you need to talk to Matthew.
Okay.
So,
and what did Matthew say that day? Of course, you ended up talking to Alan. We'll come back to that. But what did Matthew ended up saying that day? Do you remember?
well, from what he told my daughter, he told her that, when my daughter called him back and said, "Hey, what's this ping pong stuff? You tell me to call Mookie. Mookie tell me to call you. What the hell's going on?"
Yeah.
And Matthew's explanation was, well, in case I wasn't saying anything in regards to where Chris was, in case Akea called. Something about in regards to Akea calling, my daughter ended up saying. Akea didn't know them. Akea didn't mess with them.
Yeah.
He didn't socialize with them. But it was one of those, like, Chris met up with a girl, and
You think it was? Let me ask you this: you think it's a situation where Chris is meeting up with a woman, and his buddies just don't want to tell Akea that he did that? I mean, could it be something as simple as that, or what?
well, that was basically the persona that Matthew was giving my daughter.
Okay.
But we're not Akea. My daughter is not Akea.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I'm not Akea.
Of course not.
So, I mean, Akea didn't contact them.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter contacted them on my behalf. So,
Yeah.
but that was the persona that they were trying to give in the event Akea asked. Akea is not going to ask. Akea don't know you and know your phone number to ask you anything.
Okay.
It was one of those situations.
Okay. I shouldn't need to ask you specifically though. In these initial conversations, once again, this is the next day. Did Mookie / Allen or Matthew ever bring up Brandy Jones?
Brandy Jones's name came up, I believe, a few days before the encounter with me and Mookie.
Okay. All right, so we'll get to that. So I just want to make sure we keep this nice and orderly. So the next day, they're asked about this, and neither Matthew nor Allen / Mookie mention that maybe a woman's name, a woman just in general comes up, but no names were mentioned.
Not to me.
Not
to me at that point.
All right, just want to make sure. Like I said, that's totally fine. So they're talking, they're just saying, we don't know what happened. He went off with the woman eventually. It sounds to me like we're a little. Would you say the way they acted, the word evasive? Would you say Alan and Matthew were evasive?
Yes, and suspicious, and still to this day it's questionable what they know.
Okay. And I can totally understand that.
So they made it clear that it was a girl that Chris met up with. So my daughter and I, we, racking our brains trying to figure out, okay, who in the heck, what girl, who? So
Right.
we started trying to reach out to girls that we know that Chris had a previous relationship with, and hoping that's where he was.
Yeah.
And each time we would say, "No, I hadn't heard. No, I haven't talked to him in a year. I hadn't talked to him in over a year. I haven't talked to him or seen him since we broke up." One of those things.
Yeah.
So, so we started getting, you know, it started getting a little hot. We started getting worried,
Of
and
course.
I'm okay. Well, we have to call the police. This
Yeah.
is we have to call the police. Um, so Kaya and I talked, and she was like, my grandfather said we need to call the police because he's not answering the phone. And my uncle said that no one had seen him or anything. So Akea and her grandfather ended up going to try and file a police report.
Okay.
And they were told that because he's an adult,
Yeah.
26 years old at the time, he probably stepped away, get a breather, and it seemed as though it was the same conversation that Bohannon's mom got. Need to blow off steam. He's
Yep.
with an expected father. Who's to say he didn't just walk away and doesn't want to be found? People just leave. No, he wouldn't leave. And it took me talking to the police. She called me back. She said, "Mom, I don't know what's going on. They saying all these different things to me, and I mean, my grandfather got into an argument with the sergeant there or whatever, and they won't let us file the report." So I said, "You know what? I'll do it. I'll do it." And so I end up calling them, and they went through the same song and dance. How do you know he didn't just leave? How, why would you think he's missing? What makes you think that he just didn't want to be gone? What makes you think he wants to be found? Because this is my son, and I know that this is abnormal. It's suspicious, and I'm worried, and my son is missing.
Because
My
he has
son
a
is
pregnant girlfriend, and the two guys who last saw him are being evasive when being asked about what being seeing him. That's why. That's why
right,
That's why I'm worried.
right, exactly. And I told them those things, and because those things were stated, they said okay. They said okay, and so I had to act tough. I had to
Yeah.
basically say, "Hey, you know what? Some bodies start dropping in that neighborhood, then y'all understand that I'm serious. My son is missing."
Yeah.
That's how those are the words that I use with the police,
Okay.
and it was that terrifying.
And so, what did they end up doing? Did they, of course, you had Alan's phone number by this point, you have Matthew's phone number. Maybe Brandy's name hasn't come up necessarily yet. We'll get to her eventually. But did they go and check any video cameras in the area, phone info? What kind of ideas did you get about what they attempted to do?
Nothing. No phone records to the day has ever been retrieved.
Okay.
Chris's phone has never been pinged by the police.
Okay.
Um, I do know that Mookie was picked up by the police and they spoke with him. I I am aware that Brandy Jones, they did speak with her. She spent time at the police station being questioned.
Okay.
To, I mean, I'm not for sure the house on 64th and Campbell Kenshawn Ward's home. We may I don't definitely know I made reference to that home several times with the
Mhm.
police because the people in the neighborhood led us to that house. Led us to that house.
Huh.
And then that's how Kenshawn's and story came about. And I became familiar with who Kenshawn is, who Brandy Jones is, and who Shantae Bohannon was. So after the police report and the missing persons file was submitted and they did the report, and that's when and they put it on the news, of course. That's when people from the neighborhood, along with Chris's dad, ended up in the neighborhood to confront Mookie and Matthew and some more of Chris's friends, and they were led to 6444 South Campbell.
And that is where Kenshawn Ward, who was murdered the year before, where he lived along with his mother and maybe some other people.
Correct. Yeah.
I see. Now I have to ask you this: when this is going on, of course, Chris is missing for 6 hours. He's missing for 12 hours. Missing for 24 hours. 2 days. 3 days. At any point when you were thinking that, of course, you didn't know about those two other murders that are still unsolved. But did you ever think back to Joanna's disappearance and just in a moment think, could these two things be connected? Could Chris's disappearance and Joanna's disappearance, did that ever occur to you in those early days?
Yeah, I'm like, how do people go missing like this? You know, what's going on? I knew it had been over almost a year since Joanna had been missing. So I'm like, I start asking questions. Is this related to Joanna's disappearance? Does this have anything to do with that? Then the stories became, well, people think that Joanna's disappearance was because of this or because of that.
Yeah, we don't want to get any specifics, but there were a lot of stories going around of why Joanna went missing, and then people kind of what we would call extrapolating out to then this is why Chris went missing. And once again, we're not putting any theories out there, but there were things going on. There were people in the neighborhood of this market area thinking, yeah, this is probably related.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, I'm not for sure. I can't recall exactly how how Brandy Jones came to light.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm unsure of.
All right, we'll get into. All right, so let's just take that off as a jumping point. So we have this disappearance. You get the police involved. Just kind of wrap this all up. This part of it, and they're not doing much. In fact, maybe they took the report and they went and talked to Alan and everything. But really, probably the police are just thinking, "This guy took off. What do you want us to do?" Right.
Pretty much.
Despite Joanne, them knowing certainly about Joanne being abducted the year before, certainly forcefully. Nobody doubts that. Right. And we know about the other murders that happened in the area. But for Chris, it's, we just don't know. We just, and we're going to do is the minimum amount, and that's it.
If they did the minimum amount outside of, letting us file the police report, the missing person report.
Okay.
So we were told, don't go knocking on doors. We were told if we enter any private property, like a boarded up building or anything of that nature, we would be arrested.
Okay.
Arrested. So we were advised what not to do.
Let's move on to this. Let's just talk about Mookie a little bit again, just to make sure we understand this. To be clear, here we're doing this interview on August 20th of 2024, and to this day, at least to you, he has never explained how he and Chris ended up meeting up that night.
Yeah, no, I'm not certain.
All right, and we'll get to Matthew a little bit later. So when was it, being that we've mentioned her so many times now, when did Brandy Jones's name come up? How did it come up to you?
There's a girl that's been in everybody's inbox, and she's been contacting young guys, in amongst the group of friends, of Chris,
Okay.
and her name is Brandy Jones, and she's related to. She lives in the same house that Kenshawn Ward lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so we're once again. Kenshawn Ward murdered July of 2016. Brandy Jones lives under the same roof that he does.
Correct.
And when did you first hear the name? How long after Chris's disappearance? I realize it's been almost 7 years now.
Okay.
So how long after Chris's disappearance did Brandy Jones's name come up?
Maybe about 3 or 4 days, possibly. Yeah, about 3 or 4 days after Chris went missing.
All
Her
right,
name.
and I'm not gonna. I would never ask you a name like this, being that this is somebody giving you information. But was it somebody you knew who came forward with her name, or how did her name pop up?
It came up after the interaction with Mookie that I had with Mookie.
Okay.
And I asked, I'm like, okay, so he's saying it was a girl that Chris was supposed to have met up with.
Mm-hmm.
So I started asking questions in regards to this so-called girl.
Okay.
Mookie claimed he didn't know who she was. That's the story he told me.
Okay.
But prior to me having the conversation with Mookie, there was a neighborhood, outreach. The family, the friends, Chris's dad, they all were in Mookie's presence and Matthew's presence, and they went and stormed the house. Not stormed it, but went knocking on the doors to the house on Campbell. And Brandy's picture was brought up and shown, and her name was given that day.
Huh.
I was unaware because the association. Matter of fact, I'm wrong. I was aware. Mookie wasn't aware. I was aware of the Brandy Jones person once, and this was the day the police allowed us to file the missing persons report.
Okay.
And I want to believe that was like October the 13th of 2017. I believe it was. So about October the 13th is when I knew of Brandy Jones and
Okay.
her involvement with everything.
Okay. What have you learned? What were you told about her? That I heard you said that she was like a party girl, and what did this mean to you as people? What did you find out this meant? People telling you about this.
They claimed she was the party girl, and that she was the girl she was the girl to stay away from.
Really?
And one of the things that that boggles my mind is if this girl was dangerous, she was supposedly been in all of Chris's friends' DMs and trying to hook them up or trying to get with them to. Now, this is what the friends are saying she is.
Okay.
She's the party girl and she's the person to stay away from.
Okay.
But Chris was unaware of this, that this was the person to stay away from. Why didn't he know to stay the hell away from her?
That's what I'm asking you. Now it's been almost 7 years. Has anybody, yourself, any of your children, Akea, anybody who you trust, has anybody ever been able to verify that Chris and Brandy Jones had any contact ever?
No.
Never. Nothing. Zero.
Never. Never. A few years ago, Chris's dad ended up getting a call on Messenger or a text. I'm not for sure, but he got a call on Messenger from someone that knew Brandy in Atlanta. And that was the only connection or only information that we got that Brandy knew of Chris's incident. But in regards to Chris and Brandy having any type of connection outside of that, no. I was just told that she may have been in his inbox. She texted him, and he was to meet. He was meeting up with her. So
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. When she was finally tracked down, did she verify? What did she say about that night? Because she was tracked down. They did talk to her. Did she verify Alan's story, or did she say that Mookie was full of it?
Well, the police tracked her down. She basically that she didn't know him. She didn't have any involvement with it. She don't know what they're talking about. And to this day, from what the police has told me, they questioned her, and Brandy Jones is not her name. That's all the police told me. No, nothing about suspicion or anything like that. I don't know.
Okay, and once again, we realize it's not a real name, but let's just say her real name's Jane Doe. There's no communications between Chris and some woman who's never otherwise been able to be identified.
Right.
Okay,
No.
so what? Just to be clear, though, Brandy Jones, the way we know her, her alias, whatever her real name is saying she wasn't there that night. She didn't meet up with Chris. She doesn't know why he went missing. Nothing.
Yeah, that's
All
what
right.
she's claiming.
That's what she says.
That's what she
And
said.
and that is that in your opinion, is that the opposite of what Matthew and Alan have said?
Yeah, it's totally the opposite of what they're saying. And I wish the police would have done, pinged his phone just to verify, had they had any communication. And to this day, Chris's phone has never been pinged.
Yeah.
It's never been tested. Pinged to see where it may be, where he may be, or any type of communication that he could have had with anybody. So it's
Okay, so
like everything
we have conflicting stories here. We have a woman saying, I wasn't there, I don't know what they're talking about. Whereas eventually, although he didn't, necessarily say it to you, Mookie, who claims he was the last person to see Chris alive go off with a woman, he says that was the woman.
he says that was the woman. Yeah, he claims that was the woman because when the picture of her surfaced, when the dad was present, I wasn't there. Dad was
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
That picture is the same picture of the Brandy Jones that I looked up, and so it was a connection, and she's the same Brandy Jones that lived in that house.
Right. Yeah, and what are the odds that Alan brings up or Bunky Moose brings up the name of a woman who lives in the area? She lives in that area,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to this. Now you have had some conversations back and forth with Brandy, and well, they haven't been too nice. Maybe I don't know if we need them. We're not going to make them public. But what would you of course have talked to her about all of this? What has she said?
I never had a conversation with Brandy.
Okay, yeah. Who were the screenshots? You sent me these screenshots. Who were those
I
screenshots between?
Okay. Yeah, so Chris has the Facebook page. We have the Facebook page for Chris
Okay.
Finding Marlo, Chris Gulley. And one of the members of that group
Okay.
had conversation, the communication rather, with Brandy early on. I would want to believe months after Chris had gone missing. And Brandy's name was brought up quite a bit. And so one of the members had that conversation or that communication
Okay.
with Brandy.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, and it was
Yeah,
it was a little nasty.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It
I
was a
haven't
little
read it in
nasty.
years, but yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask you this, but she makes a claim in the once again, I don't, because of the nature of them and the tone of them, I don't think I want to make them public. But maybe you have. I don't know if I'm. Maybe that you've made them public at some point in the past. Totally fine by me. I don't know if I'm going to do that. But she says in one of those texts or the conversations that her own brother was murdered. Has anybody ever been able to verify that?
Well, from my understanding, from our verification, our research, she's talking about Kenshawn.
Is she?
She's talking about Kenshawn. From our understanding, Kenshawn is the brother that she's referencing.
Wow. All right. So she's not just living there as like a roommate in that house. Kenshawn could actually be her brother, half brother, something like that.
I don't think so. I think that that's just one of those play brother type
Okay.
situations, or that's like brother from another mother type
Okay. I got
thing.
you. I got you.
Yeah,
All right. Gotcha. So they're not biologically related, but she thought of him as a brother.
I believe so. Yeah.
Wow. So that's who she's talking about. So then once again, there's this conversation. It's nasty. She's claiming she didn't have anything to do with Chris's disappearance. But anyway, well, I lost my own brother, and that very well may be who she's mentioning, although she doesn't mention Kenshawn in that discussion, right? She never mentions him by name.
No, not that I saw. No.
Okay. So there we have this thing. So to kind of maybe put this for explain this kind of for the listeners. So we have Kenshawn who gets murdered. No doubt it's unsolved. Shantae most likely murdered, being that she ended up in a trash can. Somebody put her there. Who was the seemingly the girlfriend of Kenshawn. Joanna Wright goes missing December of 2016. We come a whole way around to October of 2017. Chris goes missing. And what do you know that this woman's name name pops out of nowhere, who just happens to live in the same house as Kenshawn and so close with Kenshawn that she calls him her brother. What are the odds?
What are the odds?
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you this, and we're just going to try to keep this as limited as possible, being that we've talked about it so much. What has Kenshawn's mother had to say about all this?
Well,
Anything at all? Anything publicly? I don't know if you've ever spoken to her one on one. Has she ever said, "I think that so and so killed my son Kenshawn. I think so and so killed Shantae"? Has she ever voiced anything out there that you've heard?
No, I've never spoken with Kenshawn's mother. I've never had any interaction with her. But Chris's dad was amongst those that end up knocking on her door.
Okay.
And her verbiage to him, she just asked him, where was all of this noise when my son was killed?
I see.
That was her words to him. And he said the way she gave him just a look, like it just gave him chills. It sticks with him to today, he said.
Okay.
But he said her words was, where was this noise when my son was killed?
Okay.
No one said anybody's son was killed. And now that's the thing that sticks with me the most, because in our search effort, we're looking for a missing person.
Yeah.
We're looking for a missing person. We never ever acknowledge anything in regards to him being anything other than missing. Everybody else's speculation is murdered and alive. I'm the last person to see him alive.
Yep.
Where was this
like
drama?
Mookie said, I was the last person to see him alive. Oh, really?
Really? So if you're the last person to see him alive, that means you did something, you know something, because that's a statement that you really should be careful in saying.
Yeah.
You really ought to be careful in saying such statements, and it's just weird that he said that.
Yeah.
It's suspicious.
Okay. All right.
And
but just to get back to my question though, Kenshawn's mother, who of course has lost her son, no matter what we think happened there, she has never said, I think John Smith killed my son. I think Jane Doe killed my son. I think my son was murdered for this reason. She's never said anything like that publicly.
Not to me. Nothing to me. Me and her had never had any type of communication at all. Now, what all was said on her porch that day that's a question, for others.
Mhm.
But
Right.
I'm not, I'm not aware of anything that she may have asked by way of that. But other than where was the noise when, where was all this
Right.
neighborhood interaction? This, when my son was killed,
Okay.
murdered.
All right. And the thing is, that's not a, it's a common phrase I hear from many guests. Of course, there are disappearances out there that get all this kind of attention. Mara Murray, Brian Schaefer, and then there are many that don't get anything. And so I've heard that. I mean, what she's saying there, if she said that, I've heard a lot of my guests say the same thing. So
Absolutely, and
it's not unusual.
yeah,
Okay. All I'm concerned about is if she ever had any theory as to Ken Sean's murder, which then might help us try to understand Shantae's murder and maybe Joanna's disappearance, maybe even Chris's disappearance, but she's never offered up anything like that.
never offered anything to me,
Okay.
um, or anyone that I'm familiar with.
Okay. And I
You
could
know,
not find anything out there on Web Sleuths or anywhere else that she's ever said anything either. So I don't know. Okay, we'll move on. Importantly, Brandy didn't stay there in the Campbell Street area for long, did she?
she did not. She actually left maybe hours after the visit to that home.
Wow.
Um, yeah, because they were told the people that went to that home were told that she was at work and somebody knew where she worked. It's crazy that people in that crowd of people that went to that house knew this girl's name, knew where she worked. I'm not for sure who it was that knew where she worked, but several cars of people end up going to her job where Brandy Jones worked.
Okay.
And they were informed that she had taken a leave of absence the day before, I believe. So
And she moved. She actually got
she ended up,
entirely, and we don't even need to say where she eventually went, but she moved out of Illinois, the state of Illinois.
yeah, she ended up leaving Illinois, as far as I know.
Okay. To your knowledge, has Brandy, whether she had anything to do with this or not, it's up for the listeners to decide. We're just going over what was said and what was seen and everything at the time. To your knowledge, has Brandy ever offered up a theory as to what could have happened to Chris? Did she ever said,
Outside,
I think John Smith caused Chris's disappearance. I think Chris ran off. Ever offer up any theory at all?
not to me. She and I have never had any communications either.
Hmm.
Um, so not to me. Outside of those um text messages that she communicated with the member of the page,
Yeah.
nothing. I That's it. That's the only communication from her that I'm, aware of.
Okay. One more
And from
question regarding Brandy Jones. Once again, it will be up to the listeners to decide: was she really there that night? Are we believing her? Are we believing Alan? Where are we supposed to go with all of this? It will be up to the listeners to try to decipher everything that's these stories that really, really, really seem to contradict each other. One more point: any proof that Brandy knew Joanna that
yeah,
you've ever seen?
well, it's not that I've ever seen. I've been told. I've been told that Brandy knew Joanna
Okay.
and that they they knew one another. I'll just say that Brandy knew
Okay.
Joanna.
Okay.
I'm aware that Brandy knew. I'm sorry that Joanna was familiar with Ken Sean
Okay. Makes sense.
and possibly Bohannon,
Okay.
um, Dante Bohannon,
Okay.
possibly Dante Bohannon,
All right.
and those were that was told to me that those few people knew each other.
All
So
right. So it's not not, of course, they live in the area. It very well be, this is just an example. I'm not saying there's proof of this. Very well could be that Brandy maybe got her hair done by Joanna. Being that that's how you knew Joanna, is it possible that maybe that's how Brandy knew Joanna as well? It was something as harmless as that.
It could have been. Yeah, it could have been.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Let's go back to the FaceTiming with Kiki. I got that wrong. I thought it was Ikea, but it was actually Kiki he was FaceTiming with, and he was joking around with her. Chris was joking around with her. But obviously, he was not anywhere near where Kiki was. But he said very abruptly, I have to go.
He said, "Yeah, I
That's
have to go. Let me call you back."
And in Kiki's, of course, Kiki's known Chris for a long time. They have a child together. In her opinion, he looked startled, maybe even a little worried.
She didn't say words. She said he looked startled, like, something wasn't cool.
Mm-hmm.
One of those. So I guess worried, but she said he looked like something wasn't cool. He looked startled because the way he abruptly looked up from the phone, almost like he walked into some stuff, an ambush or something. I don't know. That's my speculation, and that's my theory. He walked into something.
All right. And, I don't do a lot of FaceTiming, that kind of, but, I know a lot, of course, I'm in my 50s now. It seems to be something that is like young people do, what young people do in their 20s, like Chris was. And so that maybe they, we hear these stories about kids, faces in phones, and they walk into an intersection and get hit by a car. This is not uncommon. People get so caught up in these conversations, they don't realize what's right in front of them.
Right.
But he abruptly says, and he said, I'll call you back, but he never called back.
He never called back.
Okay. All right. And we already talked about the records. We don't know anything about the phone records and Ping's police. Seemingly, if they've done it, you don't know about it.
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Let's move on to Matthew. We've already talked about Mookie/Alan. Matthew, though, was involved in that night as well. And there was this talk about, I'm not getting caught up in that BS. Talk to the other person. Have you ever been able to decipher that, what that means, Matthew, Alan? What does that even mean?
I don't know. That was from Mookie. That was Mookie stating that he wasn't going to get involved in the Bulls. I'm not going to take the fall for. You need to talk to Matthew. So when it was brought up, when my daughter brought that to Matthew, that's what the Akea, if Akea contacted us, was about. I don't know what he's talking about, but in other words, that has something to do with in the event Akea called trying to find out where Chris was when they claim Chris met up with a girl. So I don't believe, I'm just, it's all suspicious to me. It just,
and it sounds, it could be, the thing is, there's two either ways you could look at this. It is very suspicious, and Alan and Matthew know exactly what happened, and it's not something that's, very good. Or on the other hand, it's kind of like, everybody knows that I'm a single guy. I'm 54. I'm a straight guy, but I've never been married. I don't have any kids, but most of my friends are married. And I'm very clear with all of them. Don't think I'm ever going to cover for you if you cheat on your wife. Or just because I'm a single guy and everything, don't think that I'm going to go along with you just because we're friends. All right, I'm not going to do that. And maybe that's what they're talking about, and because that's kind of probably what I might say if one of my friends said to me, hey, I'm going to be seeing this other woman, because that's probably what it'd say. I would say, hey, John, I'm not getting caught up in your BS. Don't put this on me,
Right.
I suppose you could see it that way. And maybe we would if Chris had not gone missing, but Chris went missing, so it seems so much more serious than that.
Right. And I would see it that way had Akea called.
Okay.
Akea didn't call. My daughter and I called. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't Akea making the call.
Yeah.
So if that was the response that you would give Akea, or however, or avoid, information, trying to avoid having that communication with Achaia. That was Achaia. We're not Achaia.
Yeah.
You're talking. They were
Right.
actually talking to Chris's sister in regards to. So
Do you think they
no,
could have feared that maybe what they said, if they admitted that, you know what, we knew Chris was going to see this other woman, that eventually get back to Achaia anyway, even though they were talking to Chris's sister?
no. I don't know. I don't believe so. I'm not for
Okay.
sure, but I doubt it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't believe that was for that. I think it's sus. It's a suspect. I don't trust it, and I
Okay.
believe that they know something.
Okay. Very good.
Because absolutely not one soul on this earth has ever said anything in regards to Chris, other than the association with Bohannon,
Mm-hmm.
Ward, and Joanna.
Right.
So
Okay, very good. I'm just here to ask the questions and to pose a couple different possibilities. You're the person who knew Chris and knows Achaia, knows all these people. Or Lo, you never met Alan and until later, but you've gotten to talk to these people. I have not, and so that's why I have to ask these questions. Thank you
yeah.
for explaining that. Let's move on to this. Of course, Achaia is the one who lost the boyfriend, lost the love of her life, lost the father of her child. We'll start here. Had she ever heard of Brandy Jones before any of this? Was she just as surprised about this name as you were?
Yeah, she was. Yeah, she had never heard of her.
Okay.
And it kind of got overwhelming to her. Things were being over because a lot of things were coming to the surface where people were saying that Chris was seeing other girls on the site. So,
Yeah.
but she had never heard the name Brandy Jones before.
Okay. I also have to ask, I know this is a sensitive question. Did she ever get the idea that Chris, maybe she never heard Brandy Jones's name, who whatever her real name is, but maybe suspected that Chris might have had another girlfriend? Does that, I have to ask, has that ever
Early
come up?
on, you know what? She kind of, early on when those names are coming up, she started saying, "Ma, I just need to step back because I'm getting mad. I'm getting mad."
Hmm.
Different things like that. But she's like, I'm just not gonna risk my blood pressure going up. I'm not gonna risk anything, health wise happening to me. So I just want to step back for a minute and not talk about anything because there were girls coming out saying, "Oh, he called me the day
Hmm.
before. I talked to him the week before, and he was at my house 5 days before." That type
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
And they were making this stuff public,
Yeah.
on social media and tagging her. And I thought was probably BS, but no, she had never heard the name Brandy Jones. She never thought too much into it, and she just felt that this was an opportunity for people to start airing out dirty laundry if there was dirty laundry to air.
Okay.
Um,
And we have to
so
remember, she and Chris didn't even live in that area anymore. And
right,
if he was
and
really seeing Brandy over in that area or any other woman in that area, I mean, how's he getting over there? I mean, it would
exactly,
be very
and
obvious.
right, and she knew where Chris was. She said, "Well, you know what? I can attest for his whereabouts. You know, he was there. He was with her. He wasn't for months. He hadn't been in that area. So she really just was trying to protect her sanity and her unborn baby at the time.
Okay.
So, no, she didn't really believe that Chris was seeing anybody. That he couldn't have been. How? If anything, if somebody was being seen, they were coming to him at the house, but no, Chris wasn't going anywhere.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Just between, once again, this would be coming from Akea, anything that she said after Chris went missing. Did Chris at ever, any time, they're home alone, just the two of them, we might call it pillow talk. Did he ever say, you know what? I think the murder of Ken, Sean, Shantae, and the disappearance of Joanna are all connected? Or did Chris ever say anything to Ikea like, you know what? Those two people got murdered. Joanna went missing. Man, maybe I should be watching out for myself. In all that time of 2017, when those two were a couple, before he went missing, did he ever offer up any suspicions to Ikea that she ever passed on to you?
No, she never had passed on anything to me.
Okay,
However,
please.
all the Ken Sean stuff, and it came to Chris's dad. It originally, all the
Mhm.
Ken Sean connection, and possibly Ken Sean being mistaken for Chris. That was all told to Chris's dad the day of the search effort,
Yeah, that's just once again,
from the
it's just
friend.
rumorizing. I don't know
But
if there's facts. All I'm
right,
asking you is, being that
right.
Chris knew these things were going on. I'm
From
sure he
again,
knew that Ken Sean got murdered and Shantae.
yeah, I'm
He
sure
never said directly to, okay, you know what, something's going on and something in the
he
old
never
neighborhood.
mentioned anything. He never mentioned anything to me in regards to the possibility that he had shared that information with her.
All right, but
He
did
never,
she's never said anything directly to you since this all happened. Of
right,
course, you've had an opportunity to talk to her. You, of course, have a
yeah,
grandchild. She is,
right,
I guess
right,
she's the mother of the child.
right.
You've talked a lot. She's never said to you, you know what? Chris said to me, here's what he said just a couple weeks before he went missing about all that other stuff. Nothing.
No, she never said it. She never said anything. And I asked her um, about all of those people,
Hmm.
and she never, she didn't know anything about any of that. She didn't know who Ken Sean was. Basically, from my understanding, by her living not far from there,
Yeah, yeah.
she knew of the murder.
Hmm.
She knew of the murder, but in regards to a possibility of it being connected to anything, she never mentioned anything of that
Okay, very
nature.
good. Thank you. I know you. We haven't spoken in too flattering terms of the police, of course, and that's not unusual. It's common in Chicago. Of course, we've covered another disappearance from Chicago, but went way back some ways to John Spear, totally different situation. But we've had a lot of problems with police departments not taking disappearances seriously all over the United States. Do you think the police think that these two unsolved murders, these two unsolved disappearances are all connected? Do you get any feeling for that at all?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, the news media, the police, they've always tried to make a connection. I'm the one that was very adamant, and I was the last person to think that these things, these incidences were connected until um, probably recently, not long ago when the police contacted me. But apparently, the police believe that there is a connection with it all.
Wow.
Now they're not talking to me much about anything. They, we don't even communicate unless I reach out to them.
Yeah, of course.
Um, I had a police officer, a new detective, reach out to me this past September 23.
All right, so almost a year ago.
Yeah, yeah, in regards to an anonymous call they received,
Hmm.
and connected, made a connection with all three. Well, I'll say three because the question was, do I know if Chris was present during the time Kenshawn was murdered?
Right.
And the police stated that a lot of things in regards to what the anonymous caller stated, that Joanna, Kenshawn, and Bohannon actually were familiar with one another, and they were all in the same vicinity at the time when Kenshawn died.
Wow.
So, the
Okay, and you did say
question,
there were a lot of people there.
yeah,
So
And, and one of the questions to me from the police, from the detective was, do I believe Chris was there? I don't know.
Don't know.
Do you believe that Chris was there? That's the question.
Yeah.
I should be asking them. Do you believe that Chris was
Right.
there? Because I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Let me ask you this, Melody. Being that you've brought it up a couple times, and the listeners know I tread very lightly on this type of stuff, but I got to ask you. It seems like very early on, this theory that Kenshawn was mistaken identity that came up very quickly after Chris went missing.
Yeah, because that was the first thing that I was told, that um, it was rumored that Kenshawn was mistakenly murdered, and
Okay.
he lives a mistaken identity.
All right.
And
I'll gladly put up Kenshawn before this episode comes out. I'll put up pictures of Chris and Kenshawn, see if people see a likeness. I can't say that I do, but
I
mistakes are
don't.
made. But I got to ask them, why would somebody want to shoot Chris?
Your guess is as good as
All
mine.
right, so
I
there's that.
know. Now, here's the one thing in the neighborhood, they ran around there. They were a little miniature gang or whatever, he and his
Hmm.
friends.
Okay.
And I'm not familiar with what all that he was involved in, so I have no idea whether, why, but that was told to me that, it was mistaken. He was mistaken for Chris.
Okay. Now
And
we should,
that was the
but
initial.
okay, all right. That's something that came out that maybe they're all hanging out. Maybe Ken, Sean, and Chris don't know each other, but they're just kind of in the same group. Somebody comes along looking to kill Chris for some reason, but thinks Kenshawn is Chris. Bullets
Today,
fly, the person takes off, and then only finds out later, oh my, I shot the wrong person.
right. And I honestly don't believe that.
I see no
I
reason
look
to
at
believe it either.
Chris and I look at Kenshawn, and right now I still wonder how in the heck could you mistake one for the other? So no,
Okay.
I don't believe that it was mistaken. I I honestly don't. And at that time I did think that it was a possibility. And what boggled me was the fact that why?
Yeah.
Why? So
What's also hard to understand also is that the person would find out very quickly that this person, this killer, this assassin shot the wrong person. And then it took over a year to track down Chris
right,
again to do that. It seemed like if that
right,
was a situation that they would have gone back and if, at least attempted
right,
something very quickly. That obviously
right,
didn't happen. So,
right. No, it didn't. So
okay.
I think that was just something bogusly said for whatever reason. I don't know. Probably avoiding the truth. And this information came to Chris's dad from Chris's friend. So I think it
Okay.
was something to avoid the truth, just to make an association.
Just guessing, just people
Yeah,
throwing out ideas.
stuff out there. Because we never heard it before. After that, that was the first. I've never heard it publicly. No one has ever told it to me outside of Chris's dad, and we haven't heard it again.
Okay, very
We've
good.
never heard it again.
All right. So I just wanted to add, being that you brought it up a couple times, I thought I should at least ask you about it. It seems far-fetched to me as well. Although I am, like you, inclined to believe that all of these things are connected somehow, although I'm not going to say, at least on the record, what it could be. Of course, we've talked about
Right.
that. We're not going to get into that. Let's move it
Absolutely.
on to this. Obviously, I have to ask you this. How bad has the last 7 years been?
It's been horrible. It's never ending. I and every scenario that a person can ever imagine is going through my head. Um, it's just been crazy. And then what hurts so bad is it's almost as if no one cares. You know, it's almost as if no one cares. It's almost as if whatever reason, whoever is behind my son's disappearance is getting away with it. You know, he's not gone on his own account. He didn't pick up and leave. He didn't do that. But it's been horrible. It's just been, it's a big question without answers to it. It's a question with no answers. No one's talking. From what I'm understanding, no one's talking. I don't live in the area, so I'm not hearing anything. And the couple of people that I do hear from that was a friend to Chris was nowhere around when Chris went missing, and they haven't heard anything. And they've stated that they've asked questions, but yeah, nothing. We don't. It's like he just was zapped into outer space.
What have your siblings, your son, I mean, your children, Chris's siblings have to say about it? How have they handled the last almost 7 years?
About the same as me. We very seldom talk about it. They won't talk about it. They don't bring it up. No one brings up Christopher unless I bring him up. But they have unanswered questions, and they're trying to figure out who knows something. And what does this all mean? And whether this connection with Bohannon and Ward, whether it's all connected or if it's just separate entities.
All right.
So they're in like the same, spaces I'm in. What the hell just happened? Every day we wake up and when we do think about it, we do get together and we talk about it. It's like, oh my God, what happened? We all still in that shock stage at times. So it doesn't go away. It's not going away. There's no relief. It's a roller coaster ride. Some days it's like it just happened, fresh, and it's days and sometimes weeks that I don't want to answer the phone. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to eat. And it gets, with them, they just keep going. They do more and more and more and more to keep from thinking. They're not stopping. They're working and taking up extra hours and getting involved in different things just to keep their minds clear. So they're always busy doing something, because one of the things that this is doing to us, it kind of got us closer together because everybody knows where everybody is at all times now. Everybody shares their location.
Yeah.
And it's like we just stepped into a new norm. Almost nothing's private amongst us anymore.
Yeah.
Because everybody's looking out for the next. Because of Chris and Joanna even. It's hard to just deal with everyday life, not knowing those answers. What the heck has gone on? What happened? And we're just not getting those answers like we want.
I have to ask you, in searching for the truth over the last almost 7 years, given that we have 2 unsolved murders and 2 disappearances, and certainly in one of those disappearances, it was certainly an overt act, a woman getting abducted in broad daylight by multiple men. Any threats or anything that have come to you or your family in trying to figure out what happened in all this? Anybody saying, you know what, you got to stay away from this or else?
The police?
The police.
The police?
The police.
The police,
Okay. Anybody
no,
else besides them, I
no,
guess. Any
no,
scary messages or anything like
no,
that? Nothing.
no. I've not gotten any scary messages, no threats, no community, no, no.
Okay. Okay.
Outside of the police saying it's bigger than you think, stay the hell away from that house.
That's what they said. The police said it's bigger than you think.
Yeah, yeah. And for us to stay away from 6444 South Campbell.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's bigger than you think. And of course, the next question is, well, then, Mr. Police Officer, how big is it?
I've asked that. I've asked that. How big are you talking? Because we need to know. Is my son connected with the weight of this investigation or
Yeah.
whatever? So
Yeah.
what I'm thinking now today, bigger than what we think. The only thing that comes to mind today is the fact that Kenshawn was murdered.
Yeah.
Shantae Bohannon was murdered.
Yeah.
Last seen at that house. That's Kenshawn's house.
Yeah.
Her situation is still unsolved.
Yeah.
And here we are beating on this lady's door for my son,
Yeah.
and they're still investigating Bohannon, if they're investigating Shantae Bohannon's murder.
Yeah.
So bigger than you think. That's the only thing I can get from that. Yeah, it's bigger than what we think, because the more we think about it, the more it sounds like everything and everybody is associated with the people at
Right.
on 64th Campbell.
Right. Including because that's where Brandy Jones lived too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, something I've not mentioned during this interview, being that I'm in the disappearance business, is I have reached out to Joanna Wright's family, and I've been in contact with one person, her family. I'm not going to get into who that is, but really at this point, her family just doesn't want to talk about it at all. But in my summation that will play after this interview, I'm going to get maybe a little more into some of the things that have been out there that I believe are factual regarding her disappearance. That, I don't know if it gives us any more clarity on Chris's disappearance, but could lead us to believe that Joanna's disappearance was not a spur of the moment thing. This seems to be something. It wasn't like three guys driving down the street and just said, "Oh, let's kidnap this woman today."
Right.
It seems like this was planned, that they knew where
Right.
she would be, and they made some preparations beforehand to get away with this abduction. I'll just leave it at that. Melody, if you have a Facebook page, website, anything like that, why don't you tell the listeners about it right now?
Well, we do have a Facebook page called Find Marlo Chris Gulley, and we monitor that page, and that's a page where we would like candles, and opposed to being out physically doing that, and hopefully get information in regards to anybody that wants to submit any information regarding Chris's disappearance. There's a email address attached there. It should be in the description of the page. But we do accept any and every bit of information that anyone has in regards to any information leading to the whereabouts of Chris.
Okay. Okay, so once again, why don't you say the name, and then I have another question for you that I maybe forgot to ask. Please say the name of the Facebook page again, please.
The Facebook page is Find Marlo Chris Gulley.
Right, and Marlo is his birth certificate first name, but everybody called him Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you this question, being that there is I would say a very good reason to believe that these 4 incidents, murders, disappearances are connected. Is it your impression, of course, you've been following all of this very closely since Chris went missing, are you to believe that Chris's disappearance was the end of this? Or is there anything else that has happened since then like a disappearance or an unsolved murder that is also connected to all this? Or does it seem like Chris's disappearance kind of ended these horrible string of crimes? What do you think?
Well, again, what brought me to this? Chris's disappearance actually brought me to everybody else's
Yes. Right.
outside of Joanna.
Right.
Outside of Joanna,
Right.
and then Chris. It
Yes.
brought me to those. So, if there's any other incidences that may have occurred in that area,
Mhm.
I'm unaware if it's
Okay.
associated with, Chris's disappearance. I
Okay.
don't want to say that all of this ended with Chris's disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a few things that may have occurred over there
Mm-hmm.
that involve Chris's disappearance. I'm not for sure, so.
Okay. All right. So what we're saying is there's a reason to believe these four are connected, but we're not saying these are the only four. There may have been some other disappearance or murder out there that maybe is
It's a
connected.
possibility.
It's a possibility. All right. I'm gonna
It's
have
a
to look into that
possibility.
myself. Okay.
Yeah.
Melody, any final words before we complete this interview?
Well, outside of asking for anybody that may have any clue or any guess as to what may have occurred with Chris going missing, you know, we would gladly appreciate if someone would say something. If
Okay.
someone would absolutely tell us something anonymously if you need to, but we just need to know, and we're here.
Melody, thank you for appearing on this episode of Unfound.
And thank you for taking the time to hear my story.
You're very welcome.
And that was my August 20th, 2024 interview with Melody, mother of Marlo, Christopher Gulley. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. As you should have guessed by now, I've made a video to show how close all the locations mentioned in the interview are to each other. Seriously, it's as startling a revelation regarding geography that we have ever encountered on Unfound. Please find the analysis on the YouTube channel. There was a very important piece of information that got left out of the interview that all of you need to consider. Is this a coincidence or something else? The murderer of D. Mike turned himself into police the day before Chris went missing. What do you make of that? You'll have to decide for yourself. Side note, that guy is supposed to be getting out of jail soon. True story. Moving on, you heard me state toward the end of the interview that I attempted to feature Joanna Wright's disappearance as part of the overall presentation. However, they chose not to be interviewed. Should they change their minds, I'm always ready to talk. But what I've learned in reading up on publicly available material is that there's one huge notable piece of information that you would think should have helped solve Joanna's disappearance, but it did not. What is that fact? It turns out that the car used to abduct Joanna had a license plate from Ohio, and that somehow someone determined that the car was a rental, and it was found. Given all that, you would think the renter should have been tracked down. Yet, Joanna's disappearance is still unsolved. So, I'm not sure what to think. Yet, this does not mean the abductors went out of Illinois to get a car. Oftentimes, rental cars have license plates from other states. Very common. So the car, despite it having an Ohio license plate, could have been rented in Illinois. Either way, the renting of a car, as I stated in the interview, is 100% a sign of premeditation. Joanna's disappearance was absolutely planned. Why would somebody plan to take her? That question is still unanswered. Going back to why we're all here together today, the disappearance of Chris, that he knew about Joanna's abduction but still did not seem to fear walking those same streets, tells me he did not think her disappearance had anything to do with him. In fact, given that he was FaceTiming with his first child's mother, out on the same street where Joanna got abducted, this shows an immense lack of fear. So the issue then is, was he stupid, naive, or truly sure that Joanna's disappearance was not connected to him in any way? You'll have to decide that for yourself. The real conundrum of Chris's disappearance is that there is a huge difference in stories told by Alan, aka Mookie, and Brandy Jones. Once again, that is not her real name. Mookie claimed she was there. However, and this was also something that came up more clearly after the interview, Mookie, when first asked about Chris's disappearance, said Chris met a girl and left. No description, no name. He acted like he had no idea who she was. Yet, the very next day, after Mookie/Alan had spoken to Matthew, even though Matthew himself was allegedly not out there that night, Mookie said the woman was Brandy Jones and gave Chris's family a very specific description. Why did Mookie need Matthew to give him a description of the woman when Matthew was allegedly not out there on the street that night? Yeah, nothing suspicious about that at all. Most importantly, Brandy Jones claims she did not meet Chris that night. Also regarding this, if Kiki, the woman FaceTiming with Chris, is correct, that Chris hurriedly got off the video call and looked surprised doing so, this does not sound like a situation where Chris suddenly saw Brandy or any other woman in the distance. If this were a planned encounter, would Brandy have really cared if Chris was FaceTiming with another woman? Not to mention, the explanation would be straightforward. Yes, I have a child with her. So I gotta say, if Kiki's recounting of the hang-up is correct, I am more inclined to think Brandy is telling the truth than Mookie. Would I go as far as to say Brandy wasn't there that night at all? Yeah, I might be prepared to do that. But here is the forgotten part of this disappearance in my estimation. The only reason Chris was even out there that night was because he forgot that charger at Akaya's uncle's place. That's the reason Chris didn't go home with her. Remember, she said she would arrange an Uber for him, but Chris disappeared before that could happen. However, what Mookie later said was that he was planning to give Chris a ride home once his mother got home with her truck. You can choose to believe that or not. Meaning, unlike Joanna's disappearance, Chris's could not have been planned because nobody could have predicted he would forget his charger. However, Chris could have forgotten his charger on purpose so as to spend more time in the Campbell Street area because he didn't think Akaya would allow him if he asked. But Chris would not do this unless he made additional plans once he was alone there. And that's where Alan and Matthew come in. If this happened, then Alan and Matthew knew he was going to do this. Thus, they might have leaked that information to someone who wanted to harm Chris. And that's the reason the two have been so unhelpful ever since. This must be given serious consideration. Even so, what's hard to understand is Alan and Matthew getting mixed up in something like all of this. What exactly was the plan? Why Chris? Was it because of D. Mike, Ken Sean Ward, Shantae, or something else? Unless Alan and Matthew were two of the guys who abducted Joanna. The eyewitnesses' descriptions do not match them. However, we know how often eyewitnesses get things wrong. Seriously consider this. What are the odds that two people who know each other, Joanna and Chris, go missing from the same block 9 months apart, but each is taken by two different groups of people for totally different reasons? It seems unlikely. And given that Mookie, aka Alan, at least was out there with Chris that night, is it crazy to think he was also there on that block that day when Joanna went missing? I hate to say that, but maybe that's the only way to square what happened on Campbell Avenue. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Chris Gulley, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.